Chapter 652. Those reincarnators are at best a few small shareholders in the capital market. We are just borrowing their resources to operate. Are you afraid that they will take away the company? Chen Ong handed him the information in his hand. Take a good look. Under the leadership of excellent managers such as Xiao Bolong and Zhao Yingqi, the organizational structure of the Horace's Eye has been very perfect. We have imitated the modern company system and divided the Horace's Eye into two parts. One is defined as a local company that operates the country of Egypt, develops, and grows continuously. The other is an organizational entity that penetrates the world, operates and increases the value of the capital we bring from God's space, and the other is a transnational secret organization that takes care of the interests of other agents. The specific form of the organization is also divided into two parts. Among them, the operation of the resources of God's space is known as the Inner Circle. The leader is the Council of Elders, which is equivalent to the Board of Directors. I am the Chief Elderamon, you are the second CEO, Old Nut, and Hong Fan is the first CEO, Old Seth. Chen Ong said as he threw him a large pile of documents and regulations. The large amount of information left Zhang Ziqiang at a loss. He hurriedly scanned through a few thin documents. The complicated rules and regulations of the organization, the style of interests, and the rules and regulations made his brain hurt. He pushed the documents and said, I don't understand these, but they do look quite formal. Of course, we are going to be the operators of a formal underground secret organization. Of course, the organizational regulations have to be formal. Chen Ong casually flipped through a few documents and pointed to the signatures on them. These are all made by the Elders of Internal Affairs, that is, Xiao Bolong and the others. Now their code names are Zio and Tevenut, and they are responsible for the reorganization of the Horace's Eye. Now that the reorganization has been completed, the organization can glow with new youth and firepower and operate healthily while we are away. Now, Horace's Eye no longer excludes other forces from getting involved. Just like modern companies, after the efforts of Xiao Bolong and the others, the reorganized Horace's Eye organization also has a strong ability to assimilate and purify itself. Through the unity of our founders' team and the correct reorganization of the organizational structure, we have ensured the realization of our core interests. The huge manpower, material resources, and practical influence of the Horace's Eye organization will not be wasted. We have decided to restructure the middle and outer circle, and establish the capital structure and method of operating value-added. In other words, other than the core forces and organizations, such as the 9 pillar gods, including the Egyptian government, ordinary blood breeds, and low-level members, will be separated from the inner circle. While ensuring the inner circle's dominance, we will accept other forces to develop and operate. In my vision, only reincarnators can join the inner circle, and we will firmly control it in our hands. It is related to the core strength of the operation of the Creator's space resources. The middle circle will use the embrace of the blood breeds to transform, attract, and assimilate other external forces, and jointly operate the Eye of Horus, the backbone of the blood breed empire. The outer circle will control the basic organizational structure of the army, enterprises, local forces, intelligence organizations, and other basic forces, attracting and assimilating other talents to participate. The inner circle will be like a holding company, the middle circle will be like a multinational company, and the outer circle will be like a government organization's unique structure. At this time, we can not only absorb a large number of reincarnators into our inner circle organization, realize capital appreciation, and share dividends. We will naturally have the largest share of the benefits, and we can also use this to quickly expand the middle and outer circle organizations. At the same time, we will form a core, decentralized decision-making layout, and help us achieve good development of the organization after we leave this world. Chen Ong looked at the huge platform that was gradually revealing its true appearance and looked into the distance. If this organizational form can succeed, we can not only form an absolute home advantage in this world, but we can even promote this model to the entire creator's space. Under the circumstances of studying the creator's rules, we can adjust the company's structure and organizational structure, realize the reincarnation teams, and let the reincarnators have an investment market. We will perfect the capital market of the reincarnation space, and realize the great achievements of the reincarnation's capital operation. We will completely perfect the capital market of the creator's space, and change the current trend of simplification, shallowness, and brainlessness in the use of space resources. The reform and opening up of the creator's space, and financial innovation, who else but us can do it? At that time, you will all be the capital tycoons among the reincarnators, and you can earn a lot of support and benefits without doing anything. Chun-Ong said heroically, if this plan can succeed, it will completely change the current reincarnation team organizational structure of the mercenary corps. It will change the current grassroots team that is like a king of grass, with no organization, no records, no structure, and the rights and interests of the reincarnators cannot be guaranteed. Zhang Ziqiang was dumbfounded. He asked in a small, trembling voice, "Your plan is very good, but as long as the Lord God gives us a simple task, these things will disappear without a trace, just like a castle on the beach. We are, after all, ants living in a system created by the Lord God." It's a good plan, but it seems, Chun-Ong sighed. This is the difference between you and I. You are always afraid of the Lord God, treating him as an incomprehensible and unrecognizable existence. But I have always tried to understand, to recognize, to discover the internal existence of the Lord God, to explore the rules of his operation, to adapt to him, to influence him, to transform him, to learn, to recognize, and not to be afraid of failure. In this world, there is nothing we can't understand. Even if it is an ant in the Creator's system, the reincarnators should try to study it. Not as an individual, weak, and one-sided study, but as an organization, with science, with philosophy, with the wisdom of a group, or even a civilization, to explore and discover, to study and deconstruct. This is where the nobility of us humans lies. Chun-Ong looked into Zhang Ziqiang's eyes and said sincerely, in the Creator's space, the most important thing is to survive. But humans can't just survive. Animals, plants, wild beasts, bacteria, whatever they are, as humans we have to explore endlessly. If it's just for survival, how are we different from stupid insects? Just like what that poet by the Boluo River sang 1,000 years ago. Lu Manman's cultivation is far away, I will search from top to bottom. My heart is kind, even if I die 9 times, I will not regret it. Although these 2 lines are not the first and second couplets, they do speak the words in my heart. Chun-Ong bowed slightly and no longer cared about Zhang Ziqiang, who was deep in thought. He walked down the spire and strolled on the high platform, looking at the lights of Cairo City in the distance. He nodded and said, "The reason why I want to test you first is to screen out those who are really suitable for experiments and cooperation. If you can't even complete this little test, then you can die." Chun-Ang's voice echoed in the cold wind. "Also, the company is going to go public. How can we not show our strength? Even if we can't start the financing process, we have to let the investors see the hard power of the company they invested in. And I'm a company holding a knife. I can't just violently sell my shares in an instant. The investment market is not perfect yet. We have to feel the stones to cross the river. If we don't hold a knife and force you to buy, how can we build up the confidence of your investment? This is the pain of financial reform. Everyone, don't you understand?" Chun-Ong chuckled and said, "This is also a response to the call, to realize the financial innovation of God's space. God's space, the first roadshow of the Eye of Horus organization going public begins now. Investors are welcome to join our shareholders' meeting." The red blood captain, David, was pressed into the stone wall. The violent impact made the stone pieces spread beautifully. Hong Fan pressed one hand on David's head. He could feel that David's skull had been broken into several large pieces, and his brain was splattered on the ground. However, David's vitality was still strong, and even his consciousness was still clear. But with his head grabbed by the monster's hand, David finally fell into despair. He did not know what kind of evil energy he had attracted to make this powerful and indestructible monster come to him. Not only did this person have powerful blood energy and black magic, but his body was also unbelievably strong, and his body was indestructible, just like the monster. He killed him 3 times, and in the end, the more he fought, the stronger he became. By the 3rd time, even though he used his trump card, the result was still a crushing result. In the end, even David's immortal body was broken. Although he could still rely on his immortal ability to barely hold on, David knew that if this continued, this monster would definitely be able to kill him. A look of despair appeared on his face. At this time, the monster actually said, "Not bad, you are qualified." He let go of the back of David's head with his right hand, and the muscles all over his body returned to a streamlined shape, revealing a square face with thick eyebrows and big eyes. Hong Fan rubbed his somewhat sore hands and feet, and suddenly remembered Chin Ang's instructions. He raised his head and said to David, "If you can survive 3 rounds without dying, then you are qualified to participate in that thing. Do you see that place with the light? As long as you are still alive, go there. Otherwise, you are dead." Chapter 653. The British gentleman, Edward, stood in the dark, looking up at the 4 pillars of light shooting into the sky. The pillars of light illuminated the upper half of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The steel platform on the pyramid was made of extremely strong glass. The light shone from below, illuminating the entire platform. This kind of tempered glass was nothing special in the 21st century. It could even be used in some trade fairs. However, in 1921, the significance of this was extraordinary. The bright light illuminated the entire platform on the top of the pyramid. Edward could clearly see a handsome young man with a gentle temperament standing on the highest point of the Great Pyramid of Giza, looking down at the direction they came from. The city of Cairo was surrounded by bright lights. Around him were dozens of mysterious men in black robes, busying themselves with various tasks. Edward recognized the mysterious people who attacked him just now. They were dressed in the same black robes. He could not help but become serious. Elizabeth, who was standing beside him, also recognized those people. She was not as calm as Edward. Although it was obvious that she had cleaned up, her pale face and frightened eyes made her look a little haggard. Elizabeth chuckled coldly when she recalled the dangerous attack of the bat wolves. "They really don't care to hide." Edward smiled. "Why would they hide? Can't you tell? This is a test. Otherwise, those men in black wouldn't have retreated so easily just now. Those people behaved appropriately and calmly retreated. Apart from the wolf bat that died due to the genetic collapse, did we keep any of them alive? This is a warning they are giving us. You can also call it a warning." Edward's face darkened a little, but he still said indifferently, "They are warning us to abide by the rules of their game, or else we will have to face their all-out attack. And they will be crushed into pieces." Zhang Ziqiang spat out the 2 words coldly. He turned around and said to Hong Fan, "Professor Chen is much smarter than you. Do you think he doesn't know that even if we face all the other samsara travelers, we can still gain the upper hand? You can tell that most of them are weak from the battle, but Professor Chen can't see it? Hong, you still have a lot to learn. Superiority and victory are 2 different things, and victory and total annihilation are 2 different things." Zhang Ziqiang looked at Hong Fan and shook his head. "Indeed, even if we only used the majority of our strength in the first wave of attack, we would still be able to kill most of the reincarnators. Other than a few who are cunning or extremely strong, the rest would just be cannon fodder. However, you will never be able to kill all of them. The life-saving capabilities of the reincarnators cannot be underestimated. As for those who survive, the threat and danger they pose will increase exponentially, tenfold. For those people, the team was not only their weakness but also their concern. They did not want to force others into a dead end. Hong Fan. Unless you have the confidence to get rid of these hidden dangers in the shortest time possible. Zhang Ziqiang looked at Hong Fan, who was deep in thought, and patted him on the shoulder. Professor Chen sometimes makes crazy decisions, but not this one. I don't know what he wants to do, but I can already grasp a trace of it. When his faction was weak, he wasn't afraid to hunt down those samsara teams and absorb their nutrients to grow. At that time, he was like a predator, careful and cautious. He didn't make a move, but when he did, it was like a thunderbolt. He used it to obtain nutrients for his growth. But when he accumulates enough strength and his body becomes enormous, he is transforming into a ruler. It means that the way he absorbs nutrition changes from gnawing the flesh and blood of the reincarnators to a way that is stealthier, and less likely to raise resistance. That is exploitation. Zhang Ziqiang looked at the direction of Chen Ong and sighed. He probably wants to breed these reincarnators. Luo Xing, dressed in white and carrying a sword, walked barefoot on the sand. At night, the desert was cold and bitter. The sand under his feet was a substance with a very low heat capacity. It was as hot as charcoal at noon and as cold as ice at night. But no matter at noon or night, Luo Xing felt nothing. Only some people could see that when he walked barefoot on the ground, a trace of Qi meridian was communicating with the ubiquitous meridian of the earth called Dragon Meridian. Edward was walking in front of Luo Xing. Seeing Luo Xing coming alone with a sword, he was slightly surprised, but he still greeted him in friendly Chinese. Your Excellency Luo Xing, why did you come alone? Team Taotai is powerful, so they should not have suffered too much damage in the previous attack. Luo Xing just nodded slightly, not showing any alertness. On the contrary, the muscles of several people around Edward stayed in a tight arc. Edward hurriedly winked at the people behind him. Elizabeth whispered to her teammates, "Relax, you idiots. Go back and recite the information about the Space Master for me 10 times. Luo Xing is a martial arts maniac. If he wants to kill you, he doesn't need a sneak attack." Edward stepped forward and chatted with them in a friendly manner. He knew very well that the 9 Provinces team opposite them had put on an imposing posture. On their side, they could only resist if everyone united. Even if the samsara travelers were fickle and no one trusted others absolutely, they should at least pretend to be united against the outside world. Otherwise, they would rather surrender or give up on the mission after recalling the thunderous power of the 9 Provinces team in the previous test. Of course, Luo Xing also understood this. He bowed slightly and said, "Setting up a platform on the Great Pyramid of Giza and waving Mingguang to invite us. Such a big move shows that the person behind this is not an ordinary person. In the last test, this person came like a thunderbolt, as if from the 9th heaven. In the blink of an eye, he attacked like a tide. After a few rounds, he finished his test like a clear river and retreated without leaving any mud behind. Since such a person has invited me, how can I not go? As for the rest of you..." Luo Xing looked back at Chen Ong on the pyramid and said with a smile, "The life and death of Team Taotai, the rise and fall, glory and disgrace, all depend on me. As long as I am here, Team Taotai will be here. The rest of you are just mediocre." Edward laughed and said, "Your Excellency Luo Xing, you must be joking. The strength of Team Taotai is extraordinary. How can you underestimate the other teammates of Luo Xing?" As he spoke, he looked back in the direction of Cairo. In the distance, another team was coming in this direction. Edward smiled and said, "A few more friends are coming. I wonder which team they are from?" David, the captain of the Red Blood team, and his team were in a mess. He looked up and cursed in a low voice, "Damn it!" Chapter 654. Half an hour later, Chun-Ong saw a group of samsara travelers appear under the Great Pyramid of Giza. There were about a dozen of them, and they were divided into 5 teams. Except for Luo Xing, who came alone, the other captains had brought most of their teammates. However, at this time, only 5 captains showed up. The captain of the Nightmare team, Edward, and the captain of the Angel of Death team, an Arabian man, were accompanied by a woman. The captain of the Red Blood team, David, and the captain of the Wings of Light team, were going to the Great Pyramid of Giza alone. The captain of the Taotai team, Luo Xing, was going to the meeting alone. Apart from them, the other samsara travelers were hiding in the shadows. Perhaps they thought that they had hidden themselves well, and that they were able to stay out of the battlefield so that they could launch a fatal attack at any time to support their captain. However, in Chun-Ang's eyes, they were as obvious as pearls reflecting light in the darkness. The Great Pyramid of Giza was surrounded by an enormous magic force field. The second star of the constellation Ursa Minor, the Imperial Star, the brightest star of the constellation Canis Major, the star of Sirius, the North Star, and the first star of the constellation Draco, the Right Pole Star, were connected to the Great Pyramid of Giza in a special way. Their powerful energy waves were projected onto the ground around the Great Pyramid of Giza, forming a huge magic field. This force field was controlled by Chun-Ong. In fact, he was the one who had made it happen. Next to Edward, Elizabeth carefully noticed the strangeness of the Great Pyramid of Giza. She whispered in Edward's mind, "Edward, something is not right here." Edward's eyes flickered. He already had a similar feeling. After all, this was the home ground of the 9 States team. It would be strange if they did not have something to do with it. However, everything would be fine as long as there were clues. Edward had never let his guard down. He asked in a low voice, "Yeah, I felt something too. What did you find?" "Why," Elizabeth said solemnly, "astrology is an important school of magic. It is the symbol and power of the stars. It is one of the most important research objects of the ancient magic school. It even spawned a corresponding school of magic, the school of astrology. Before the study of astrology became independent, the ancient scholars mixed the relevant knowledge into their most important inheritance. The most ancient civilizations such as Egypt, China, Sumeria, Greece, and India were all based on astrology. Although the status of astrology has fallen in recent times, and Hogwarts has lost much of its inheritance, I still learned something related to astrology when I was studying at Hogwarts. Do you see the stars in the sky today? It was the second star of the Ursa Minor constellation, and also the brightest star in the sky. In ancient Egyptian astrology, it was the star most closely related to the pyramids. It was called the Star of Water. In the magic world of Harry Potter, it was also extremely important. Even the Blake family named their eldest son after it, Sirius. The birth of the basilisk is also related to the magic of this star. A 7-year-old rooster laid a magic egg when the Sirius was in the sky, and it was hatched by a toad. This is the source of the basilisk's magic. In China, it belongs to the Well of the 28 constellations. It represents one of the 3 killing stars in the sky, and it symbolizes the invasion and war of foreign enemies. It is the dog star in the Greek population, the Alpha star in the Arab population, and the Rudra, Shiva, in ancient Indian astrology. Edward's face instantly became gloomy. He whispered, "I know. This is not an ordinary star. No wonder it is so bright tonight." "Why," Elizabeth said nervously, "it is very powerful. It can be said that it has the power to change the sky and the earth, but that is not the most important thing. The most terrifying thing is, can you see it? It has now appeared in the direction of the south tunnel of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If we look down from the sky, we might be able to see that the Great Pyramid of Giza and the 2 other pyramids are exactly the same as the 3-waist star of Orion, and the Great Pyramid of Giza is on the Sirius. The 3-waist star of Orion was called the Ginseng constellation in ancient China. Shen was the Chinese character for 3, referring to the 3 stars. The ancient Egyptians believed that these stars were sacred objects dedicated to Osiris, the god of the underworld. Why, Elizabeth said excitedly, I don't know what happened here, but the starry sky we are seeing today is not from this era. It is the starry sky from 2,500 years ago, when the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. This is a legendary or even a forbidden level spell. It can even distort the sky. The mysterious person behind this used the special occult symbol of the Great Pyramid of Giza as an altar to communicate with the sky. With the power of the Orion star, the Sirius star, the North Star, the Crate Myrtle star, and the Right Pole star, he connected the power of the Sirius star, the North Star, the Crate Myrtle star, and the Right Pole star. Maybe there are more arrangements that I can't see through. Together, they formed this terrifying magic. In Arcana, it is called a legendary spell. In magic, it is called a forbidden spell. In magic, it is called the terrible power of the inherent barrier. Hearing this, Edward finally understood how serious it was. He hurriedly asked, How does this magic compare to the inherent barrier in the moon? How does it compare to Dumbledore's legendary spell? Why, Elizabeth said seriously, only stronger. Can you guess the general effect of this magic? Edward's face was almost dripping with sweat. He looked up at the mysterious shadow at the top of the pyramid, and a rare sense of fear rose in his heart. Edward's unusual behavior had attracted the attention of the other 4 captains. The Arabian from the Angel of Death followed Elizabeth's gaze. When he saw the starry sky, he could not help but shiver. He and Edward looked at each other, and they both saw the fear in each other's eyes. Elizabeth analyzed for a while and shook her head. The caster of this magic is too much lower than me. I don't know what the consequences will be. However, in the astrology magic, the spells related to fate, causality, and curses must exist. It may also include the domains related to time, space, world, and illusion. Chapter 655. Something is not right, everyone. Edward said to the other 4 captains through the telepathic connection created by Elizabeth. We can't just maintain a tacit understanding on the surface. The strength of Team 9 states is far from being as simple as what they showed just now. You should be able to see by now that they have given us a show of strength. Edward solemnly suggested, I think we need a formal covenant and commitment to ensure that the tacit understanding between us can be carried out effectively. We need to do our best to unite and fight against that friend above us. David and Salman looked at each other and saw the hesitation and solemnity in each other's eyes. David, the captain of Wings of Light, said through the telepathic connection, I think that effective mutual trust is much more important than a verbal covenant. As long as we confirm that Team 9 states really needs us to unite to deal with them, we will naturally make up our minds to unite. But it is easy to make up your mind, but it is difficult to trust them. David's words made everyone silent. He revealed a cruel fact among the reincarnators of God's realm. No one would easily trust others. It was easy for them to work together against one side, but the strength of Team 9 states had been imbalanced to the point that they had to effectively unite against one side. Trust between them became very difficult. Because there was nothing to trust in the reincarnators, God's realm seemed to have deliberately created this kind of prisoner's dilemma of trust. In a rapidly changing situation, everyone could only trust their own team, and even themselves. I might be able to help you with this. A voice suddenly interrupted. This voice was unfamiliar to everyone. Elizabeth, who was in charge of the telepathic connection, felt that this voice did not come from the telepathic connection she maintained, but from an external telepathic connection. This sentence sounded in everyone's heart at the same time. She looked up in horror and saw Chen-Ong slowly walking down from the pyramid with a smile on his face. Chen-Ong easily took over the telepathic connection she maintained and said to everyone at the same time, in this storyline quest, a total of 9 reincarnation teams are involved. Except for the Dusk team that has been wiped out by us, the Rose and Night Spear teams that have been wiped out by Immoden, and the Yama team that is standing in Immoden's camp, the leaders of the remaining teams are all here. Welcome to this meeting of the 6 teams. I am the leader of Team 9 States, Chen Ong. You can call me Dr. Chen. This meeting of the 6 teams is to solve the 2 most important problems we are facing, the coordination of interests and trust. Chen Ong smiled and said, "So I am happy to see you unite if this gives you the slightest sense of security with us. You don't trust me and you don't trust each other more than your teams. That's why I initiated the first wave of elimination and cleanup." Chen Ong stood at a high place and looked down at these samsara travelers. He cupped his hands slightly and said, "The attack just now was a test and a cleanup. It can prove your ability and value, and also eliminate the isolated people in your team," Chen Ong said without shame. "I'm helping you guys organize the team. The people who survived now, at least your team's internal voice is finally united." "You, Chen 9 States said. Chen said, "I can do you," I said. "If there is such a possibility, please tell me. I will help you get rid of him." The platform at the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza had already been prepared. There were 6 seats, and they were arranged in a very interesting way. Team 9 States, which Chen Ong was in, took up half of the space. Across from him, 5 seats divided the remaining semicircle. This was a declaration of status, and it was also a silent reminder to the 5 captains that they had to unite and stand against Team 9 States. The entire platform was abnormally bright. They could see Cairo City in the distance from here. The 5 captains took their seat. The leader was naturally Chen Ong, who was sitting at the head of the table. Everyone was very familiar with the layout of the modern conference table. Chen Ong was the first to speak. "The reason why it is difficult for us to trust each other is because of the force field and the requirements of our missions. It makes it difficult for us to achieve a balance and exchange of interest. It is as if the Lord God is deliberately maintaining this complicated dynamic situation. It has caused a complicated situation and conflicts between us. Our missions are different, our standpoints are different, our factions are different, and our interests are fighting with each other." Chen Ong smiled. "But I have solved this problem now. Now, at least in terms of interests, we are on the same side." At this moment, Edward frowned and said, "Are you talking about the mission to protect Cairo? This mission has divided us into 2 factions, the Cairo faction and the Immoden faction. Now, other than Yama, we do belong to the Cairo faction, but I don't think this will give us enough pressure to force us to have the same interests." Chen Ong shook his head and said, "That's because you don't know what I have done for this," Chen Ong explained. "You might be wondering why Immoden was able to destroy Rose and the Night Spear team. You don't know how dangerous he is now. It's because I killed Ansuna." "What?" Edward stood up abruptly. David also opened his mouth in shock and looked at Chen Ong. Other than Luo Xing, who could still remain calm and indifferent, the other Samsara team captains were also a little shocked. Salman even said incoherently, "But Ansuna has not been resurrected at all. No, even if it is her reincarnation, it is impossible for you to find her so quickly." Chen Ong shook his head and said, "Don't forget, the Golden Sun Sutra and the Black Sutra of the Undead are in my hands, and the Hamyonaptra is also under our control. I can resurrect Ansuna at any time." So I resurrected her, and then, in front of Immoden, I punished his lover with the insect-devouring punishment, completely destroying Ansuna's body and soul. Now, Immoden has escaped the shackles of fate. His future is no longer limited. Even though Edward and the others had seen many reincarnators betray and kill, they were still shocked speechless by Chen Eng's crazy actions. He opened his mouth and asked doubtfully, "Why are you doing this? If there is only one side that has the absolute advantage and is coming with a rolling torrent, you will choose to unite and deal with this side together," Chen Ong said. "But now the existence of Immoden simplifies things. Between us, we are neither enemies nor friends. Anyone who tries to stand apart from Imhotep and us will be crushed into nothingness by Imhotep and I have to give you no other choice. You can only accept my goodwill and destroy all other choices and freedom. The only thing that can do this is a terrifying enemy. In the past, Imidon was neither terrifying nor extreme. But now, he has done it. Chapter 656. Lunatic. This was the only thought in Edward's mind. He looked at Chen Ong, who was standing there with a calm expression and an indifferent tone, and the shock in his heart was indescribable. Edward finally understood that even in a place like God's realm that produced lunatics, this man in front of him was one of the craziest. Even though everyone was looking at him in the same way, Chen Ong was still calm at this time. He walked down from the top of the pyramid and slowly walked to the center of the platform. Facing everyone, he said, if the existence of Imidon unifies our force field, it only gives us a reason not to be hostile. In order to promote real cooperation, there are still many conditions that need to be met. He glanced at the faces of Edward and the others one by one, his eyes indifferent, but his mouth was gentle. Now let us deal with it one by one. David gestured that he had a question to ask, and Chen Ong gave up the right to speak. You go ahead. David was silent for a moment and then asked Chen Ong, the existence of Imidon is indeed a threat to us, but how can you guarantee that you are not a threat to us? If we unite to deal with Imidon, but let your strength show an overwhelming advantage over us, isn't that stupid? David said in a strange tone, I think the triangle is the most stable. The whole situation should be considered in three ways. Your 9 states team, the Imidon you created, and the rest of us. We maintain the unity of the two sides, and we can overwhelm the third side at any time. No matter how you look at it, this is the situation that is most beneficial to us. Chen Ong smiled. He stood in the center of the platform and shook his head slightly. You have misunderstood. I am not suggesting, and this meeting is not a discussion, but a declaration. I am asking for your choice. Chen Ong looked into David's eyes, and his eyes were cold. He said indifferently, war or cooperation, killing or exploitation. The weak have no right to balance the strong. Do you think this situation is an attempt to achieve some kind of balance? Do you think we are asking for your opinion? Chen Ong shook his head and said, if you think that way, then there is only one result. He pressed his hands on David's desk. His calm eyes made David tremble. Crush you. So, even if you want to die, please listen to my conditions and tell me your answer. In the end, you can calmly accept the fate that befalls you. Survival or destruction. Chen Ong looked around at all the people sitting here, and was satisfied to see their silence. Only then did he smile. The core of this 6-party talks is interests. Chen Ong was the first to make a decision. The premise of interest is your stance. If your stance is to cooperate, then follow the rules we set. We will negotiate with you under limited conditions. If your stance is to fight, then we will fight to the death. Is there anyone who doesn't want to listen to our preset rules and decides to fight to the death with us? Chen Ong asked. Among the samsara travelers, there were those who were vicious, those who were sinister and cunning, and those who were passionate and united. However, there were only those who did not have the tendency to self-destruct. So, of course, no one would stubbornly do something humiliating and hot-blooded without listening to the conditions of the 9 states team. Even David, who had just been directly warned by Chen Ong, did not. So, Chen Ong continued, in this world, our greatest interest is no longer the trifling reward from the Lord God, nor the pitiful spoils of war that you have, but this world is a medium-level mysterious and low-level technological world. In other words, after we grasp the relatively complete organizational capabilities of this world, we can increase the profits of our operations. Small organizations like you may not be familiar with it, but out of some expectations, I've decided to show you the capital operation ability, product development ability, and profit extraction ability of a large organization in order to build a new production relationship among the samsara travelers in the new era and under the new productivity conditions. Chun Ong stood in the center of the platform. Two black-clothed vampires carried a blackboard up, on which was a simple PowerPoint diagram. Chun Ong introduced, in the storyline world, the general benefits that samsara travelers can obtain are points, items, knowledge, skills, and materials. Under normal circumstances, for a mercenary organization like yours, most of the profits are in points, which is above the mission rewards. The better ones will strive to obtain some key items. The exploitation of the storyline world is crude and inferior. You are a group of predators, and you are in a competitive relationship with each other because points come from hostile samsara travelers, from opposing missions, and from killing each other. Edward and the others had ugly expressions, but they still agreed with Chun Ong. Chun Ong switched to another blackboard and continued, but our 9 states team is a business-oriented samsara team. In long-term missions, we have realized that points, items, and skills are only shallow resources in a storyline world. Just like when the Spanish colonized America, they directly plundered the Native Americans' gold jewelry. Although the investment was small, the rate of return was also very fast, and the total amount was at an absolute disadvantage. If you want to obtain more benefits, you must start to carry out in-depth development. Just like when the Spanish colonized America in the later stages, we must learn how to operate the storyline world and develop in-depth benefit. Hearing this, the expressions of the captains gradually became solemn, and they began to listen attentively to Professor Chen's business class. Chun Ong pointed to a few elements on the blackboard and said, "So there are the following core elements: time, organization and development capabilities, and knowledge reserves. First of all, time is the first factor that limits our benefit. Samsara travelers have a short mission time, and the storyline progress is generally tight. It can be said that time itself is an important benefit. If the mission time in the storyline world is too short, even if we obtain a lot of points, it will be difficult for us to effectively develop and grow. Regarding this, our team has done a lot of research. We have tried to study the mechanism of the time delay penalty in the storyline world of God's realm, and explored the relationship between mission time and mission difficulty. We have gained some understanding of this." Chapter 657. A glimmer of understanding flashed through Edward's eyes. He suddenly said, "So, the main reason you killed Ansuna wasn't to use Imogen to force us, but to create the conditions you wanted. You wanted God to issue the missions you wanted, using this to extend your mission time in this world?" Edward's words were earth-shattering, shocking everyone present. David couldn't believe it. While they were still struggling with the main god's quests, someone was already trying to control the main god to issue quests. One was completing quests, while the other was learning how to create quests. The difference between the two was shocking. Chun Ong nodded slightly. The relevant formulas and functions are being perfected. This can be said to be an experiment. After ensuring the mission time, digging deep into the potential benefits of the storyline world cannot be separated from the second key factor, organization, which is manpower and resources. David nodded. Understandable. Whether you want to dig deep into the potential benefits of the storyline or operate related resources, you need to maintain control over the storyline world. In other words, you need to effectively control manpower and resources. This control must be achieved by an organization. The organization you control should be the Eye of Horus that appeared out of nowhere. To be able to promote an organization founded by reincarnators to become one of the 4 major factions of the storyline recognized by God. Edward sighed with a pale face. We can't blame ourselves for losing. Chun Ong didn't become complacent because of Edward and the others' sighs. He just faithfully played his role and continued. The third key factor is the ability to develop. This ability is closely related to the reincarnator's knowledge. Many reincarnators don't know how to develop the resources in their hands. The resources obtained by raiding organizations are mostly wasted by themselves. Not only do they not know how to develop resources, but they also don't know how to use the resources they already have, just like those raiders in history. The gold of the Spanish laid the foundation for the British industry, and the wealth of the robbers all went to the merchants who sold the stolen goods. The 5 captains of the Samsara teams had ugly expressions. This was practically pointing at their noses and mocking them. But they had to admit that it was true. Their efficiency in using props and resources wasn't high, but what made them unconvinced was that Chen Ong didn't show that he was any better than them. So David sneered and said calmly, "Such a smart operator, 9 States team. What amazing performance will you have?" Chen Ong turned his gaze to Hong Fan. Hong Fan had already received Zhang Ziqiang's instructions. He came to the center of the platform and took off his clothes, revealing his muscular upper body. His upper lip trembled violently as his fangs poked out. A pair of huge blood-colored bat wings spread out from his back. The blood energy of the blood intertwined with the power of the dark curse magic made him look tall and ferocious. David couldn't help but take a few steps back. His hands were shaking. He couldn't forget this monster-like man. How scary he was before. The entire Red Blood squad was suppressed by him alone. If Chen Ong didn't need us, David didn't doubt that he would have died in the hands of this monster. A hint of fear flashed in David's eyes, but he still tried his best to show a hint of indifference. He sneered and said, "Are you trying to show off the special skills your 9 provinces team has developed in this world? Or did you guys nurture and evolve the blood-breed bloodline that was strengthened by the main god?" Chen Ong shook his head. "This companion of mine was a human through and through before he entered this world." "Impossible. It must be a lie." David cried out involuntarily. This was the first time he had lost his composure. He stared at Hong Fan's bat wings, and his pale hands gripped the table tightly. His skin seemed to be devoid of blood, and it was suffused with the aura of death and darkness. Under the stimulation of Hong Fan's aura, David's nails became sharp and sinister, and the fangs in his mouth were silently revealed. David was also a vampire. However, in front of Hong Fan, he felt an oppressive aura. It was as if he wasn't facing a blood-tried member like himself, but a bottomless abyss. He actually felt a trace of bloodline pressure when facing a superior being. David's expression was very ugly. He repeated, "Impossible. I'm already the first embrace. Even if there are blood breeds in this world, there is no way he can be stronger than me." David looked at Chen Ong, who was still calm, and emphasized, "There may be blood breeds in the mummy world, but to say that they can directly strengthen themselves to this level is an insult to me." Chen Ong flicked his right index finger and said calmly, "Nothing is impossible." As he spoke, the black-clothed blood clansmen dozens of meters below the Great Pyramid of Giza suddenly lifted their black robes, revealing their true faces. The dozens of blood clansmen were all high-rank blood clansmen. Many of them were first-generation first enlistees like David. David could sense that these people might not be as powerful as him, but their status was the same as his. His expression was as ugly as a dead man's. Although Edward and the others did not feel it as directly as he did, they could also sense the heavy pressure. Just these blood breeds alone were enough to make all of them suffer. "You've mastered the blood breeds enhancement?" Although Edward was asking a question, his tone was firm. Chen Ong pointed behind him, and an ordinary-looking man slowly walked over. He had a temperament that was incompatible with the natives of this world, and he did not have any extraordinary power. Edward and the others had excellent eyesight, and they had confirmed countless times that he was just an ordinary person. No, he should be more accurate to say that he was a new reincarnator. The newcomer, Qian Xuanho, was even more obedient than a rabbit in front of Chen Ong, who was also a newcomer. He did whatever Chen Ong asked him to do without hesitation. He no longer had the courage to go against Chen Ong when he first entered the God's realm. Among the newcomers in the 9 States team, Xiao Bolong was the absolute backbone and administrator of the Eye of Horus. Zhao Yingqi was his secretary, and Li Mingyi was in charge of an important laboratory. Chen Ong, on the other hand, was so powerful that he could directly lead the entire team. Only Qian Xuanhou and Lin Gang were in an awkward situation. Lin Gang volunteered to conduct the blood breeds modification experiment, so he had a place in the execution team. However, after Qian Xuanhou realized his position, he fell into fear and confusion. Chen Ong gave him one, and he immediately took it. The primordial blood and the virus were injected into Qian Xuanhou's heart along with the stabilizer. At this time, Chen Ong no longer needed to perform the special curse ritual. Chen Ong simply opened the black scripture of the dead in his hand and operated it for a while. The enormous power of the enchantment that enveloped the Great Pyramid of Giza tilted a little toward Qian Xuanhou, and the powerful curse instantly buried him. Qian Xuanhou struggled and roared. In front of everyone, he transformed into a blood-breed baron. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, and Chen Ong remained calm throughout. Chapter 658. The moonlight in the sky was blood-red. Qian Xuanhou had just broken free from the violent transformation of his body. His whole body was filled with an indescribable weakness, but the blood moon in the sky seemed to be continuously supplying him with strength. A trace of coolness hovered between his brows, causing him to quickly wake up. Qian Xuanhou looked at his hands in a daze. As he clenched his fists, he felt as if he held infinite power. This was a very strange feeling. Compared to his human senses, the entire world seemed to slow down in front of him. He could clearly see the wings of mosquitoes flapping, and he could deeply feel that as long as he wanted to, he could easily tear apart the wind barrier that was once like a natural moat. Since he thought this, his body moved. He stretched out his hands, and the sharp claws of the Blood Clan tore apart the air in front of him. He disappeared with an afterimage. The reincarnators present were all ruthless characters who had fought on the edge of life and death. They could easily see that Qian Xuanhou indeed had the combat power of a Blood Clan Baron. For a mid-level reincarnation team like them, a Blood Clan Baron was already the backbone of the fighting force. This also meant a terrifying fact. Chen Ong had already proven that he could easily create a Blood Clan Baron within 10 minutes. Then, how many had he created? The Eye of Horus, which occupied most of Egypt, did not lack manpower. Even if the cost of this transformation and strengthening was very high, it was cheaper than their own lives. This confirmed a fact. For Team 9 States, operating and developing their organization's strength in this world was indeed more advantageous than solely plundering and destroying. Edward and the others looked at each other. Everything was silent. David was the first to surrender. He knew more than the others how terrifying this meant. I believe in your strength. 9 states can use the resources of other worlds in God's space to achieve greater development and utilization in this world. However, if we are willing to cooperate, what can we get? Anything. Chen Ong smiled and said, as I said, after the 9 prefectures team discovered this even more valuable benefit, it is like a productivity revolution that will inevitably bring about changes in production relations. The organizational structure of the reincarnation team has already hindered our development. Our relationship with other reincarnators should not be as simple as robbing each other and guarding against mercenary organizations. We need more effective cooperation and development. We need to develop a set of effective rules in this world. This is also an important experiment, to experiment with a new and effective organizational relationship between the reincarnators. I hope that this new relationship will be able to adapt to our changes, and we will be able to obtain greater benefit. So, you don't have to worry about our credibility at all. Because to put it bluntly, this kind of revolutionary change and experiment is countless times more important than your own value. Perhaps we will not take you seriously, but we will definitely attach great importance to this kind of development and experiment. This will be a revolutionary development and change for the reincarnation team, and it may deeply affect the ecological structure of God's space. Chen Ong looked into everyone's eyes and emphasized word by word, that is, becoming a company. Edward's hand, which was on the table, slid down in shock. He could not help but ask, "What did you say?" A company is a revolutionary organization born in the pursuit of benefits and efficiency in human history. I am not the kind of genius who can create something out of nothing. For the sake of operating capital and profits, of course, we have to learn from this kind of organization that exists in reality. This will also make it easier for you to understand and cooperate. The reincarnation team becoming a company is to make more effective use of the simple and crude mercenary organizational structure like Tubos. We will discover talents, operate the resources in our hands, and finally achieve self-development. A company is a concentrated expression of a set of organizational structures and rules and regulations. Although we do not have the ability to let God approve of this change and plan, it does not prevent us from taking the first step in this world of absolute control. You are all outstanding people in reality, and you should be able to deeply understand the meaning. Chenong waved to the side, and Xiao Bolong brought up a thick stack of information and documents. He distributed them to the 5 captains and explained, "We plan to reorganize the Horus's Eye and divide this huge organization into 3 parts. The Egyptian regime with a national organizational structure, the Global Intelligence and Action Organization with the characteristics of a multinational organization, the core leadership with the characteristics of a secret organization of the Blood Clan, and the company organization with the characteristics of the Samsara. They are the outer ring, the middle ring, and the inner ring of the Horus's Eye. The outer ring is the core of Egypt, and the Egyptian government is directly controlled by the inner ring. Organizations and individuals with influence in other areas can be annexed and joined. The relevant rules are very complicated. We developed it by learning from transnational criminal organizations like Hydra. The main purpose is to let the human and material resources controlled by the outer ring rapidly expand. For this, we do not hesitate to pay some non-core interests. As for the middle ring, in order to ensure cohesion and broad influence, it is mainly composed of the Blood Clan. It mainly uses the embrace of outstanding talents and the temptation of the Blood Clan's immortality to make the controllers of other countries and regions join us. For this, we have evaluation rules and internal checks and balances. When the political ecology of the middle ring stabilizes, we can quickly expand our power. As for the inner ring, it is the organizational relationship between our 9 states team and you. For this, we must have a strong core interest and a series of rules to follow. These are undoubtedly made by us. Before you join the board of directors and have no voting rights, you can only choose to obey, join, or fight against. Edward, David, and the others opened the relevant documents in front of them. These documents had the same characteristics as the real world's equity and management documents, and even the relevant legal principles were unified. David subconsciously took out his glasses and looked at them. Seeing the red blood Captain David staring at him in shock, David said embarrassedly, "I'm used to it in reality." David said in panic, "You mean you can understand these complicated and messy things?" David nodded and said, "Although the articles are more complicated, the relevant explanations are still very clear. It is completely according to the structure of a company in reality. Even if there are differences, they are clearly described through supplementary documents." David said as he nodded and said, "The relevant rules are very clear. I am a law student and it is really ingenious and perfect rules. They introduced the corporate system into God's space and established another organizational structure outside of the reincarnation team. The ambition and determination of the 9 states team is admirable. I am also willing to give it a try. After all, the risk doesn't seem high. As a white trash from the bottom of the European and American society, David was very used to organizations like the God Space's Reincarnation Team, which was extremely similar to a street gang, but he instinctively disliked such mainstream organizations in reality. He could adapt to the life and death battles of the Reincarnation Team, but he was afraid of contracts, documents, and systems from the bottom of his heart. He trembled and said, "What the hell is this? Listen up, I can accept a fight to the death between us. It's nothing more than a fight to the death, and the winner gets everything. But I don't accept this. I don't accept exploitation. You used these documents, contracts, and other messy things to steal what belongs to me. You used these rules to take away what belongs to us. I will not sign this thing. You are not the management of the company, and God is not the government. In reality, I have had enough of you hypocritical elite. In God's space, I lost everything, but I obtained the most precious thing, fairness. Now you just want to take it away. In God's space, you will get what you pay for. And now, you are trying to use this trash to establish a system that is as hypocritical and unfair as reality. It will not succeed." After David stopped, he found that Edward and David were looking at him with a look that he was very familiar with. The kind of IQ superiority of hypocritical politicians and elite. They were looking at him coldly and sarcastically, just like real bosses. Edward stared at him for a moment, then waved at Elizabeth. He skillfully discussed the interpretation and revision of the relevant documents with Chen Ong, and put forward many suggestions based on his own interests. Chen Ong also used legal explanations that David could not understand to reach an agreement with Edward. David wanted to get support from the others, so he turned his eyes to Luo Xing. But to his despair, Luo Xing had a thoughtful expression on his face. He pressed his sword to his waist and marked on the documents with familiarity. "Aren't you a martial arts maniac? What the hell is with the temperament of a professional lawyer?" David almost couldn't control his impulse to go berserk. He found that among the 6 parties here, the Arabs did not understand law, but they were very familiar with the relevant procedures and trusted the system. David could tell at a glance that the Saudi tycoon had adapted to the rules of the game. And David, the damn Jew, was like a fish in water. A British gentleman like Edward was even more active in fighting for his own interests in the system. As a Chinese, Luo Xing had no objection to the perfection of the organization. The style of capital swordsmen was unusually peaceful, but these people were very adapted to the environment. Only David himself was completely unfamiliar with it. As a qualified white trash, David had to use his fingers to do the 4 operations. He knew how to sell grass, lay on the ground, cut people, and sell labor, but he did not know how to adapt to the system. The stupidity that the white elites had taught him was still playing a role in God's space. Chapter 659. David's lips trembled. His eyes slowly swept across his companions. David supported his chin with his hand and looked at him like a wolf dove. David felt that his eyes were like those of a scavenger, with the inherent harshness and viciousness of a Jew, as if he was ready to cut off a piece of fresh meat from him at any time. The British gentleman, Edward, looked at David with a cold expression. There seemed to be a hint of mockery in his eyes. Unlike the greed that David showed, David could feel a hidden sense of superiority from him. Luo Xing, on the other hand, did not even raise his head. His eyes were as precise and ruthless as his swordsmanship. He could always easily deconstruct the opponent he faced, whether it was a difficult enemy or a complicated document. With just a glance, David could feel the bone-deep sword intent from Luo Xing. It seemed that the Easterner's unconventional swordsmanship had been trained to the bone. It seemed that he was not afraid of any challenge. Even when he walked, sat, laid down, or even handled documents, he was accompanied by the sword aura. However, the most eye-catching thing for David was the Arabian, the rich man. He was skillfully and clumsily trying to please Chen Ong, while the documents that would decide their fate were placed on the table like worthless garbage. Seeing that Salmon was ignoring his struggle, David, who could barely restrain himself from Edward's and David's supercilious looks, could not suppress his anger. He almost could not help but slam the table and roar at Salmon, "You idiot from Saudi Arabia whose brain is filled with sand. Do you think the rules of the game are still the same as before when you control the oil? How dare you? How dare you play this game with them? Aren't you afraid that your underwear will be taken away?" But he still restrained his impulse, because he knew that among everyone, his opinion was absolutely inferior. He did not understand what these documents were talking about, nor did he understand how to operate and use the power and resources that Chun-Ong had opened up to them. Just when David was borrowing the resources related to the Eye of Horus to create a power that he could control, just when Edward had already understood how to join the operation of this system and exchange benefits and power, just when Luo Xing had casually outlined several terms that were beneficial to him, just when the Saudi tycoon was skillfully trying to establish a relationship with Chun-Ong in order to establish a relationship with the Kyushu team, David was in a terrible mess until Chun-Ong extended an olive branch to him. Of course, he did not know that he himself was one of the results of a series of dazzling exchanges of interests. He was betrayed by all his allies and sold for a good price, and Chun-Ong was their buyer. The Red Blood team, which had lost all external resources, was completely incorporated into the system built by Team 9 State. Of course, David also did not understand why he could only be manipulated, while the other Samsara teams, who clearly had no relevant interests, could betray them. Of course, he did not understand the complicated tricks and bad habits in the process of sharing resources and exchanging interests, nor did he understand the subtlety of the principle established by the great powers in the process of dividing backward countries more than 100 years ago. He did not understand the dirty tricks of his teammates, nor did he understand why there was suddenly no way out. He did not understand that sometimes the attitude of a bystander could also be betrayed. As for Chun-Ong, he was a bystander in the entire process. He did not participate in the advancement of betraying the Red Blood team. Instead, he used this opportunity to create a tacit political understanding between the various teams and the rules of the game established by Team 9 State. He was using the process of betraying the Red Blood team to perfect the unspoken rules of diplomacy for the Samsara teams, and in the process, he continuously perfected the treaty. Team 9 States was responsible for harvesting all the relevant interests of the Red Blood team in the end. In this process, Chun-Ong had basically created a trading platform that was in charge of purchasing those originally meaningless benefits. If he was a bit more realistic, then Chun-Ong would have disgracefully assumed the identity of a slave trader. After David, Edward, and the others discussed it, they decided to sell David to him together. And the 9 Provinces team's military strength was the material foundation that guaranteed the implementation of this trade. Among the several teams that were originally free and equal, the 9 Provinces team relied on their overwhelming force to act as the government and set the relevant rules. The remaining teams, with lightning speed, signed the relevant contract with the government, which stipulated the basic rights and interests of each team. Then, before David could understand what was going on, they sold him to the government as a slave. And the violence of the government, which was Team 9 States, objectively ensured the implementation of these contracts. After this series of friendly negotiations, Chun-Ong placed his hand on the Golden Sun scripture and stood up. He smiled and said, "After the previous negotiations, we have exchanged our opinions amicably and drafted the relevant agreement to jointly develop this world. After everyone invests the idle capital of your team into this company, you will automatically obtain the relevant rights and interests of the shareholders. This includes that each team can send one person to join the Elder Council of the Outer Ring of the Eye of Horus, and recommend 3 people to join the Outer Ring as members of the Regional Committee. The relevant rights of the Elder Council and the Committee are described in document number 32. The Reincarnation Team will be established as a second-level organization under the protection of the Eye of Horus. 1/3 of the management positions will be appointed by the Regional Committee, 1/3 by the Elder Council, and 1/3 by the internal decision of the team. After the remaining 1/3 will be decided internally, they will receive a capital of £1 million from the Eye of Horus, as well as relevant personnel and military support. Second-level organizations established in other countries outside of Egypt will automatically join the outer ring of the Eye of Horus and accept the leadership of the Egyptian headquarters. However, they will retain a certain amount of independent financial rights, such as vampire strengthening potions, firearms, and other related materials. Under the supervision of the headquarters, they will be able to obtain at least Level 3 intelligence authority, and reasonably use the relevant manpower and material resources of the organizations in other regions. The highest authority of the inner ring of the Eye of Horus is the Board of Directors. All the captains of the Reincarnation Team will automatically obtain the position of Independent Director, and according to the proportion of capital, they will obtain the corresponding voting rights. Comrade Xiao Bolong will be the General Manager, Captain Zhang Ziqiang will be the Chairman, and I will serve as the Secretary General. Now, please sign the document. Chen Ong took out a few quills from the Golden Sun Sutra. At this time, all the reincarnators noticed that the papers that recorded the corresponding documents were all exquisitely made papyrus, with faint mysterious patterns on the edges. Chen Ong reminded, although due to the cost, we cannot completely use the contract of the God of Creation to ensure the implementation of the document. Similarly, after we jointly subscribe to a sum of points, the God of Creation will act as a guarantor and recognize the contract established by the Golden Sun Sutra, ensuring that there is no fraud in the terms and no error in the implementation. Although due to the limitations of the ability, the God of Creation will not erase the offender after violating the contract, we can still extract the core information of the offender. With this core information, I guarantee that I can manually carry out the punishment for violating the contract. Chapter 660. After everyone had signed their names, the extreme yang golden scripture in Chen Ang's palm emitted a dazzling brilliance. Under the cover of this brilliance, everyone's papyrus documents underwent an astonishing change. The papyrus patterns on the pages disappeared, and it became like a flat white paper with infinite brilliance, emitting a sparkling brilliance under the sunlight. Chen Ong split the documents into two and said, "We'll keep one for ourselves, and you guys can keep the other. However, if there's a violation of the contract, you can submit it to the main god. He will strip a trace of the main god's core aura and give it to you. Whether it's casting black magic curses or using his aura to sense his location, it's an excellent material." Edward accepted the documents and said with a smile, "The information we just received from the organization is of great value to us. Whether it's the investigation on Professor Indiana Jones in America, the information on the blood breeds in England, the castle of the Duke of Impaling in Hungary, or the investigation report of Van Sheenhai from 100 years ago, the results are amazing." After Nine States' team changed the way they developed the storyline dimension, the results are indeed impressive. It's worth learning and emulating. Chen Ong declined and said, "You flatter me. Nine States' team's energy is limited. Only by uniting more teams can we more effectively dig out the deeper benefits of this world. Now, our core benefits lie in promoting the establishment and confrontation of the two great undead empires in the East and West, and dragging more storyline missions into the vortex of the main storyline. During this process, we still have to maintain the huge advantage of the Samsara travelers over the main storyline. This is not easy. We still need everyone's support." Chen Ong led the way and said, "You've seen the effects of the blood breed strengthening surgery. It only costs 3,000 points, or resources worth 3,000 points. You can bring the blood breed baron home. Of course, the surgery is not mature yet, so only I can do it, and it can only be done in Cairo. You need to prepare the people who will arrange the surgery. The more convenient blood breed strengthening medicine will only cost 1,000 points. Although the initial combat power is relatively low, with only a night-level enhancement effect, its future potential is limitless. You can use the organization's internal reputation value of 100, or exchange for resources worth 1,000 reward points. Edward and David looked at each other, and then David said, Professor Chin, each of our teams has to invest at least 20,000 points in God's space. You have to agree to give us 10 knights, 3 knights, and 10,000 points, 1 baron, and 1 million pounds worth of resources. Chin Ong sighed and said, This investment will be in installments. You will have to establish Horus's Eye in England, France, and other countries step by step. Once the relevant requirements are met, the corresponding human and material resources will be transferred to you. With the development speed of the headquarters, it is easy to support 1 or 2 subbases, but if it exceeds 3, then there will inevitably be some delays. Edward nodded and said, That's understandable, but we should have obtained permission to borrow the resources of the outer ring from the Horus's Eye. Chin Ong nodded and said, You can recommend a place to join the Council of Elders. If there is any movement, just let him give the order. The members of the Council of Elders will be deeply involved in the operations of the Horus's Eye organization. His authority should be able to guarantee that most of your requests will be approved. If some of your requests are more excessive, you will have to seek the consent of the other team leaders and let them work together with you in the Council of Elders' recommendation. In theory, the 5 of your teams together can already mobilize 50% of the resources of the outer ring. As he said that, Chun Ong suddenly became interested. He said to the Arab tycoon Salman next to him, Are you interested in investing in my laboratory? Salman's eyes narrowed, and he pondered for a moment before asking, What is the laboratory that Professor Chen is talking about? What kind of operation is investment? Chen Ong casually explained, The laboratory is the core function area that I am in charge of. My main authority is responsible for the development of resources related to the Lord God's space. The previous blood race enhancement is one of the best results. In layman terms, it is a system that develops the relevant technology and knowledge system through the research of materials from other worlds and operates the relevant knowledge to make a profit. The previous blood breed enhancement was developed by using a living reincarnator with the blood breed's bloodline and a test tube of perfect blood. Not to mention the blood breed enhancement that you already know, there are also many small gains and immature technologies that are still being developed. It can be said that after success, it is a profitable business with little capital. It's just that the risk before success is too high. No one knows if those special materials can adapt to this world and develop valuable technologies, but everyone has some idle resources that can't be sold, or they are very precious and not suitable for trading. But they can't use them themselves, so they can only be used as marginal costs. Now that you have invested these resources into my laboratory and produced the relevant results, we can split the profits. After listening to Chun Eng's explanation, Salman's eyes flickered. Edward, who was beside him, also did not interrupt. The few of them followed Chun Ong into the Great Pyramid of Giza. The empty burial chamber inside had been reinforced and modified by the people of the Eye of Horus. Edward could not help but secretly nod when he saw this amazing efficiency. Putting everything else aside, just this convenience alone would allow Zhang Ziqiang to slowly accumulate an advantage when fighting against the Kyushu team. As long as Zhang Ziqiang was not a fool, he would be able to slowly accumulate an advantage and reach an astonishing level when fighting against the Kyushu team. From this point of view, investing money in exchange for the relevant authority and power of the Eye of Horus was also a necessary move. Following the complicated internal passage, the few of them came to a door that represented the laboratory area. Chun-Ong stood in front of the door, and the mechanism inside automatically activated. The door opened, revealing a terrifying scene in the laboratory. A blood-red octopus with 8 tentacles was mixing a reagent in the laboratory. When it saw the door open, it waved its tentacles at the door, and the light spots on its tentacles changed rapidly. When Edward and the others came in, they saw dozens of octopuses of different sizes moving around in the entire laboratory in an orderly manner. They were so smooth that they seemed to be a single entity. The largest one was as tall as 2 people and was carrying heavy objects. The smallest one was only the size of a palm, standing on the experiment table and operating a microscope. Zhang Ziqiang, who was following behind Chun-Ong, completely stiffened. He asked in a trembling voice, "Professor Chen, didn't you say that the vampire octopus has no reproductive ability? Did you have another breakthrough in your experiment? You are now building the octopus empire in the deep sea." Chapter 661. Just as Chun-Ong brought the reincarnators to tour a corner of the laboratory, the test tube on the octopus's tentacles suddenly underwent a strange change. A wisp of blood silently appeared in the turbid, azure liquid in the test tube. Soon, it spread like a wisp of mist in the test tube. In the blink of an eye, the entire test tube was dyed blood red. This was not a change in a test tube of reagent. In the span of a few breaths, all the liquid in the entire laboratory had been dyed blood red. The scarlet smell of rust assailed the nostrils. Even the clear water in the laboratory's several-meter-wide trough had turned into blood. This sudden change attracted the attention of all the reincarnators. Edward used his finger to pinch a little of the liquid in the trough and brought it under his nose to sniff. After a while, he stuck out his tongue and looked normal. He raised his head with a grave expression and said, "It's blood." David did not need his reminder to think of the original plot of the 10 disasters that Imogen took a stroll in Cairo. Immediately after, they heard countless rustling sounds, as if countless tiny tentacles were rubbing against the ground. The sounds were very small, but when they were connected, they surged like a surging tide. They came from above the reincarnators, beside them, and even beneath their feet, and became clearer. Chun-Ong smiled. He held the 2 scriptures under his ribs and said to the reincarnators, "There might be a little trouble up there. Please wait a moment, everyone. I'll handle it." He nodded slightly at the reincarnators, turned around, and walked out of the laboratory. Edward's eyes flickered as he said with certainty, "It should be Imogen." Luo Xing, who had been nonchalant all this while, suddenly became spirited. His half-closed eyes suddenly widened as he placed his right hand on the long sword at his waist. He said in a low voice, "How can I not be part of such a scene? Everyone, I'll also take my leave for a moment." David and Edward looked at each other and suddenly said in a low voice, "Great, I'd like to see it too. After all, we still don't know how strong Imogen is after such a major incident. It's a good opportunity to see the strength of the 9 States team." Chun-Ong came to the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza through the southern passage. He could see that the night sky before dawn was blood-red. The sky looked like it was burning, but it also looked like it was soaked in blood. The clouds were so thick that they did not disperse. It was as if there was a fire burning in the clouds. With a loud clap of thunder, huge fireballs gathered under the clouds and fell to the ground. Under the huge blood-red clouds that shrouded the city of Cairo and a radius of dozens of miles, the fireballs were like meteors, shooting towards the ground with long trails of flames behind them. The Egyptians in Cairo who noticed the abnormality in the sky screamed and fled in all directions. The city was in chaos. At first, it was at the port area of the Nile River. Several huge fireballs with a diameter of 10 feet, mixed with blood-colored hailstones the size of a human head, rushed down from the sky. The blood-red water of the Nile River surged, and wherever the huge fireballs hit, the flames splashed like water droplets, igniting everything within 10 meters. A building was set ablaze by the fireballs. The people inside screamed and tried to crawl out of the windows and doors. The flowing, splashing flames spread in all directions, igniting everything. At that moment, a few mysterious people in black robes appeared around the building. They had the symbol of the Eye of Horus drawn on the left side of their chest. They were holding machetes and quickly cut off the parts of the burning building that were connected to other wooden buildings and threw them into the fire. They quickly buried the debris that was ignited by the flames with sand. Mummies wrapped in sandstorms rushed into the fire with a large amount of sand. The people who were still screaming were dragged out of the fire by the mummies. Those who were judged as unsalvageable were shot in the face. Their bodies were thrown into the sandpits nearby. Only those who were still alive were put out by the sandstorm mummies. The people in black were injected with a blood-red potion by the mummies and dragged to the side. Sometimes the hailstones would hit these people, but even when their bones were broken, the people in black did not seem to feel anything. They quickly bandaged their wounds and continued with the rescue work. The burning blood-red clouds hung low in the sky. Countless meteors swayed in the air. More and more meteors fell from the sky from the port to the governor's district. The entire city of Cairo was on the verge of being set ablaze. However, the Great Pyramid of Giza that was surrounded by 4 giant pillars of light suddenly formed a lightning chain. The sharp cone at the top of the pyramid fired bolts of lightning into the sky. Chen-ong, who was standing at the top of the pyramid, held 2 ancient Egyptian scriptures in his hands and shouted at the sky. His chanting sounded like thunder, attracting the stars in the sky. With the Sirius, Crepe Myrtle, North Star, and Right Star as the center, the starlight of the Milky Way poured down to the ground. In an instant, the stars all over the sky were shaken, as if the Milky Way had opened its mouth and poured down to the sky above Cairo. While Lisabeth from the Nightmare Demon team was trembling as she watched the scene. The immense magic power coming from the sky shocked her to the core. She saw Edward had also come to the ground. She threw herself onto the ground and said in a trembling voice, "This is not Imogen's magic power. Oh my God! Is this still the legendary ghost god from the medium world? Imogen's curse is 10 times scarier than the one in the original novel. Even the battle between Dumbledore and Voldemort in the Harry Potter world, which is the closest to the high magic world, was not this terrifying." Edward looked at the raging flames in the sky. The powerful magic power of the curse intertwined with ice and fire was surging, reminding him that Imogen had just cast a spell that could wipe out an entire city. This is the combination of the legendary spell, Raging Fire City, and another legendary spell, Heavenly Hail. Edward's face was solemn. Even such a powerful legendary spell had to be dispelled in the face of the starlight sprinkling from the higher sky. The strong star magic distorted all the magical order within the range of the meteor, and scattered the fire clouds in the sky by 5 layers. The starlight that Chen-ong had drawn fell heavily on the fire clouds. A sudden burst of starlight could forcibly extinguish the fire clouds 300 meters around it. The flying flames in the sky gradually became sparse, and the rustling sound of countless grains of sand rubbing against each other could be heard in every corner of Cairo. Edward could also hear this sound at his feet. There was a loud noise like thunder in the sky, and a cold man with an ancient Egyptian accent chanted a series of mysterious runes. Gurhagaliri, those were runes. Chen-ong immediately understood the deeper meaning behind them. As the runes with special energy echoed in the sky, the slowly dissipating fire clouds in the sky suddenly boiled. Violent energy exploded in an instant. A black tide rose from the ground around the Great Pyramid of Giza where Chen-ong was. Countless carnivorous scarabs rolled out of the sand around them. The swarm of scarabs burst out of the ground in an instant. The swarm of scarabs had dug out a dozen holes in the ground. The moment they received the order from the runes, they attacked everyone. Imogen's curse of 10 calamities. After the first calamity, the second calamity, the second calamity, the second calamity, the third calamity, the third calamity, the fourth calamity, the scarab calamity, was triggered. The swarm of scarabs burst out from the ground in Cairo and quickly rushed to other places along the street. A few Egyptians on the street ran for their lives in fear. An Egyptian man in a white robe suddenly fell to the ground, and the beetles immediately burrowed into his body. The man screamed crazily and scratched at his body, tearing his clothes into pieces. It could be clearly seen that under his skin, there were countless protruding small lumps that were rapidly crawling. Very quickly, he fell head first into the tide of beetles. A few waves came crashing over, and he was drowned under the densely packed beetles. When the beetles dispersed, there were only white bones on the ground. No one could see that there was a living, breathing person here just a few breaths ago. Chapter 662. Chen Ong noticed the dangerous situation of Edward and Elizabeth, but he just glanced at them coldly. He did not worry about them. If the reincarnators could be dealt with so easily, he would not have to compromise for this. These unusually tenacious cockroaches all had one or two trump cards in their hands. Now they were just a little embarrassed. They were still far from a crisis that could take their lives. What he was most concerned about now was how to deal with the rune effect that Imogen had just used. Even Chen Ong did not expect that Imogen could master the essence of the Norse rune civilization so quickly. It was conceivable that Imogen's potential had been delayed by the so-called love. Love is only a temporary deception and self-deception. Only knowledge and pursuit are eternal. Chen Ong sighed. Imogen, you should thank me for letting you understand this. Only by killing you, who are addicted to love, can the true Egyptian sage, the greatest high priest, be reborn. Chen Ong smiled and said, It was I who destroyed you, and it was also I who reconstructed you. Imogen. The first rune is thorn, which represents energy, excessive desire, and violence. It is a weapon of attack and a means of defense. Occult wizards who learn rune believe that it can be used as a barrier to trap a person and block the enemy. It is an ambiguous letter. It sometimes implies good luck or the change of good luck. But here, what Imogen wants to use is its excessive, violent, and uncontrollable side. He causes the fire clouds in the sky to explode. The second rune is Gur, which represents harvest. Gur meant harvest, representing the harvest of crops in autumn. However, it also represented the entire growth cycle of crops in a year. Thus, it also represented the cycle of change and growth. In a deeper sense, it represented cause and effect. It meant that what was sown would be reaped. In China's occult culture, this was the symbol of the power of cause and effect. Imogen used this to trigger the power of the curse when he was tortured 3,000 years ago. Through the curse's cause and effect, he opened the prelude to the 10 disasters of Cairo. The magic of the disaster carried a trace of the power of cause and effect, causing the disaster to be contaminated with the accumulated darkness of 3,000 years. It also turned the souls of those who died in the disaster into Imogen's power. This was cause and effect. The third rune was Hagel. Its meaning was hail, and it strengthened the magic of the hailstorm. On a deeper level, it meant division, difficulty, obstruction, limitation, and disease. The beginning of these qualities was sudden and unpredictable, and it further strengthened the explosive power of the disaster. It also provided power for the later outbreak of the beetle disaster. This rune also strengthened the splitting nature of the flying fire hailstorm, and strengthened the reproduction ability of the beetles. The fourth rune was Io. This letter meant you, and it symbolized death or rebirth. But at the same time, it also had a deeper connection with the sacred beetle, which also symbolized rebirth. It represented the power of rebirth, reincarnation, and death. On one hand, it gave the sacred beetle the ability to be reborn, divide, and reproduce. On the other hand, it helped Imogen absorb the life and death power that were devoured by the beetle. It also gave meaning to the continuation of the disaster. The last rune was ing. Ing was the end. Chen Ong deeply understood the meaning of these runes and launched a targeted counterattack. The Black-Cloved Blood clan in Cairo was well prepared. They had long prepared flamethrowers to create large-scale walls of fire at key points in Cairo. Often, several flamethrowers were combined together, and with sufficient oil reserves, they created walls of fire that were tens of meters thick, preventing the sacred beetle from advancing or retreating. A large amount of manpower and sufficient preparation allowed the members of the Eye of Horus in Cairo to suppress the sacred beetle to a prepared area. At this time, the huge swarm of insects in the sky was also blocked by a sandstorm formed by nearly 100 mummies covered in oily sand. A huge flaming tornado drew power from the fire clouds in the sky, forming walls of fire that were tens of meters tall around Cairo, burning the locusts and flies in the air. On the other hand, the situation on Edward's side was not good. The sacred beetles on the ground were temporarily forced back by Edward's flames, but the locusts and flies in the air pounced together. The huge locusts' mouths were ferocious and bloodthirsty, while the flies' bodies carried deadly germs and plagues. Once they pounced on them, the locusts could bite them into bones, and the plague curse on the flies was also difficult to deal with. Elizabeth took out her wand and shouted with all her might, "Fire curse!" The flames summoned by black magic could burn anything, creating a huge wall of fire around them. However, the black ashes left behind by the flies became more and more stinky, and the power of the curse on them floated towards the source of the fire magic, Elizabeth. Edward stood in front of Elizabeth, but as a dragon warlock with the bloodline of the Red Dragon and a knight, he was able to deal with the large enemies with ease. However, his proficiency in swordsmanship and the power of his moves were concentrated. Apart from the fire magic that came with the bloodline of the Red Dragon, he was unable to deal with small, large-scale creatures like the poisonous insects. On the contrary, Elizabeth was proficient in magic, so she was able to deal with them with ease. She cast a protective armor on each of them, and set up layers of obstacles in front of them. However, the two who were unfortunately targeted by Imidin did not know what kind of enemies were waiting for them. Elizabeth's unique magic and the other system contained in it had already attracted Imidin's attention. From the souls of the barbarian Hans and the druids under his command, the runic power of the runes, the dark runes and the dragon's roar, had made Imidin want to taste it, and he had his eyes on the magic system of Harry Potter, which also had great potential. The essence of magic that had the same origin as the runic runes exuded a different kind of temptation in Imidin's eyes. On the other side, Chun Ong had already deciphered the runic power of Imidin. It originated from the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt, and was written in the style of the Holy Scriptures. And, from his mouth, the first rune was Ankh, which represented life, followed by the rune that represented power, wisdom, the sun, and finally the royal power. It was also the symbol of the Eye of Horus, a rune that was vivid and lifelike like an eye. The fiery clouds in the sky finally dissipated in the surging starlight. Chun Ong had cut off the curse power that Imidin had controlled through cause and effect for 3,000 years. The scarabs, flies, and locusts that were wreaking havoc on the ground had lost most of their firepower, and they no longer had the craziness to attack the wall of fire. Their morale suddenly dropped, and Edward and Elizabeth also let out a sigh of relief. Edward glared fiercely at David, and Salman the Arabian, who were hiding in the pyramid and defending themselves with ease against the narrow entrance. Of course, he also understood that although they were temporarily allied, they were still competitors. If they were in the same situation, Edward asked himself if he would have done the same thing. Chapter 663. At this time, Edward could already see the truth hidden by the swarm of insects. Spears were as sharp as a forest, and arrows were like rain. The tall jackal-headed men had a dull metallic luster, and their muscles were bulging. These were the guards of Anubis, the god of death, who wielded sharp, heavy weapons. The long time in the underworld had honed their martial arts skills to perfection. Under the cover of the swarm of insects, an army of nearly 1,000 people silently arrived at the foot of the pyramid. Edward was on the verge of despair. He blocked the front with his sword and scanned from left to right. Even the weakest death god's werewolf guards were at the level of a vampire knight. Edward said in despair, "Damn it! Imodin clearly hasn't killed the Scorpion Emperor yet. How can he use the Bracelet of Death?" "Because the Egyptian gods are taking sides." Chen Eng's voice came from behind him. He turned around in surprise and saw Chen Ong walking down the steps of the pyramid. He held 2 scriptures across his chest and looked at the guards with interest. "It seems that my several lies have provoked the Egyptian gods," he explained casually. "Otherwise, they wouldn't have forgiven Imodin so easily. However, if they see me as an enemy, then Imodin, who has already ignited the godfire and has the potential to become a god, is a great target to rope in. After all, he was the high priest of ancient Egypt, and the most outstanding one at that. He has a bit of a relationship with the gods. Now that Egypt is in a slump, if Imodin can expand his faith and restore Egypt's glory, then why not give him a god's position? Although the laws of this world have changed, like a dry beach after the tide recedes, the gods can only rely on the holes they dug in advance to survive in this little bit of seawater. The process of Imodin becoming a god is like a land animal standing on the beach, trying to transform into a fish. He doesn't know that the sea is far away in the timeline, and he will suffer the pain of drying up thousands of years later. But it's not the gods who bear this risk, so why should they care? As long as Imodin doesn't kill one or a few of them and take their precious seawater resources, the Egyptian gods won't mind helping him. Chen Ong slowly descended and faced the countless jackal-headed army. "Am I right, Imodin and Anubis? Although you will not be able to unleash the full potential of the death bracelet before you kill the great Emperor Scorpion, with Anubis opening the back door for you, it will not be difficult for you to summon these death guards." Chen Ong shook his head and sneered. "Are they not afraid of losing everything?" Edward's eyes flashed as he asked in a low voice, "You said that this world is a world where the sea ebbs, and the gods are the fish left on the beach when the tide ebbs, relying on the water in the puddles to survive. Then what is the sea? Faith?" Chen Ong shook his head slightly. "The composition of the sea is very complicated. It's a side of the origin force. You can understand it as an environment that has affinity for souls and spirituality. It's a side of the tide of the origin force. The truly powerful gods have already retreated with the tide, such as Fuxi, the Eastern Emperor Tai, and Brahma. The ones that remain are all abandoned by this world. Faith is a resource, but it's not what the gods rely on for survival. The origin force is. It's not that they don't need faith now, but the cake left behind is no longer a real scarce resource." Chen Ong looked at the guards of Anubis and sneered. "It seems that enough people have died in the First World War. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the leisure to interfere with the human world. A large number of souls dying in a short period of time will create a relatively small tide, just like the rain from the sky. It can nourish the stupid gods left on the beach, allowing them to temporarily recover their energy. However, they are too active, and they are still consuming their life force." Chen Ong glanced at the guards of death surrounding the Great Pyramid of Giza and sneered. "Interfering with the real world on such a large scale will rapidly consume the dividends left by the First World War. This will harm the interests of all the gods. If the Egyptian gods were not the origin of Judaism, and Judaism was split into Christianity, Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Truth Judaism, which make up the majority of the world's faith, and the only religion that can compete with them, Buddhism, has no gods at all, how could they possibly reach an agreement?" Edward's expression became serious. He suddenly understood. Is this the deep background of the mummy world? In this world where the gods have shown their divinity, the background story is not mentioned at all. The truth about the gods? This Professor Chen of the Nine States team is indeed unfathomable. I'm afraid he is already close to the level of a 10-star god. That's why he can sense part of the laws of this world so keenly. Chen Ong continued, "The First World War has just ended, and you people want to start a second full-scale war like this. Greedy and shameless gods. You people have done this again and again, using the large-scale deaths of humans as a temporary change in the origin force to replenish your water source. Although the origin force absorbed by this change is like the difference between fresh water and seawater when you are born, when you are in such a desperate situation, you don't have to hesitate to drink poison to quench your thirst, do you? There was a small commotion among the jackal-headed death guard. Suddenly, these tall jackal-headed men opened up a path, and the handsome former high priest of ancient Egypt, now a demigod, Imhotep, appeared in front of Chen-Ong in a black robe. Surrounded by the death guards, he looked straight at Chen-Ong. Imhotep said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, my immortal enemy, thank you for telling me all this, so that I would not be momentarily lost on the path of eternity. You have pushed me onto this path, stripped me of everything, left me with nothing so that I could pursue it. With hatred and venom, you have forced me to pick up what I once feared and despised. In order to take revenge on you, I have killed my former soul. How much do the gods in the sky fear you?" Imhotep suddenly looked up and pointed at the stars in the sky. "They should fear you because you are more ruthless and cruel than them. As a mortal, you are more divine and awe-inspiring than the gods. There used to be darkness in front of my eyes, until I accepted it with my heart. I always remember that this darkness was given to me by you. The flames of hatred burned in it, and it was by relying on this flame that I was able to avoid being lost in the darkness. The gods gave me the power of revenge because of their fear, but I know it is not enough. This power is not enough, and the fear of the gods is not enough. If they do not use all their strength to fight against you, then in the end, you will make them die without a place to be buried. You will step on the bones of the gods and announce everything you want to create." Imhotep's eyes seemed to be burning with flames. He looked up at Chen-Ang's eyes and said in a low voice, "And my soul will forever burn with the flame of revenge until death." Chapter 664. The surging crowd rushed towards the pyramid under Chen-Ang's feet. A tall jackal-headed Grim Reaper with a pair of halberds leaped high into the air. Edward and Elizabeth had no choice but to fight them head-on. Edward drew out his crossguard. His grip on the hilt was very strange. His other hand could hold the back of the hilt, and his right thumb rested on the blade. He placed the hilt below his waist, and the blade was slanted upwards. The tip of the sword was pointed in the direction of the jackal-headed man's face. This was the plough stance, one of the 4 basic starting stances of the German Richard School of Swordsmanship. This was where Edward's basic swordsmanship came from. In the god realm, there were many strange and powerful swordsmanship, but as an orthodox knight, the military swordsmanship that Edward learned was the foundation of his strength. When he was diligently learning military swordsmanship in the world of the Heavenly Kingdom, a newcomer who was in the same batch as him was obsessed with the elven swordsmanship in the One Ring that was strengthened by the god realm. But when he grew step by step to the position of captain, that teammate who learned the elven swordsmanship had already died in a certain mission. From then on, Edward knew that dazzling and complicated skills might not be as suitable for him as well-tempered and simple skills. The strengthening of the red dragon blood gave him infinite strength and endless energy. The Templar Kokuho strengthened in God's realm allowed him to fight with ease and determination. Facing the halberd in midair, he held the crossguard sword horizontally with both hands. The standard military swordsmanship allowed him to easily pour all the strength in his body into the sword in his hand. The huge strength of the humanoid red dragon made the blade of his sword as heavy as 1,000 pounds. Although the jackal-headed man in midair was tall, it had no leverage point. When the sword and halberd collided, the jackal-headed man's hands shook violently, and its body suddenly lost its balance. After Edward's sword was hindered, he quickly stabbed out from a tricky angle, and the blade easily pierced through the jackal-headed man's ribs. All this happened in the blink of an eye. Edward's sword did not stop. He continued to slash down, splitting open the skull of a jackal-headed man who was rushing towards him. His body took half a step forward and dodged an incoming spear. He used his left arm to clamp the spearhead, and with his right hand, he swung the sword forward along the spear, cutting off a few of the jackal-headed man's fingers. At the same time, he stabbed and twisted his sword, ending its life. Behind him, Elizabeth took out her wand and shouted at the jackal-headed man, "Shadowless divine edge!" The invisible sharp force field created chaos among the well-coordinated jackal-headed men, and Edward took this opportunity to kill a few more Death God's guards. However, even though his strength was not ordinary, facing these Death God's guards who were dozens of times stronger than ordinary people, he still felt somewhat helpless. Moreover, these Death God's guards were the most outstanding soldiers. The long tempering in the underworld had not only perfected their martial skills, but also allowed them to cooperate as if they were one person. Any one of the jackal-headed creatures could be easily killed by Edward, but the fact that there were so many of them in battle made them even more threatening. After Edward made a lot of gains in the beginning, he quickly fell into a bitter battle. Even Elizabeth was targeted by the priests of the Death Guards, who kept using spells to restrain her. The Death God's guards who rushed up to the pyramid felt as if they had hit an iron wall. They could only see the light of the swords rotating on the pyramid. Dozens of thin and small men in black slashed down with the curved swords in their hands. They were in groups of 3. Some of them were low on the ground and swung down with a slash, while others jumped up nimbly, the light of the swords in their hands reflecting the bright moon in the sky. There were also dozens of calm gunshots that sounded sporadically. The jackal-headed creatures who climbed up to the pyramid were either hit in the legs, or had blood spurting out of their necks, or had their heads blown off by snipers. As soon as they came into contact with the jackal-headed creatures, they all fell. On top of the pyramid, Chern-Ong still maintained a transcendent calmness. In front of him, there were already nearly 100 Blood Clan members in black, silently forming the first line of defense. Immoden stood tall in the midst of thousands of soldiers. Dozens of priests of the Death Guards beside him took out their hands and whispered incantations in the direction of Chern-Ong. Immoden looked at Chern-Ong with a silent expression. He saw Edward and Edward standing at the forefront of the battle line, and he just smiled coldly. A jackal-headed creature with a sword beside him, whose entire body turned illusory like a soul, whizzed toward Edward. Its body was half illusory and half real. Like a phantom, it passed through countless Death Guards who were charging toward the pyramid. This was a real Death Guard, one of the most powerful beings under Immoden. As a sword servant, it had the same status as a priest who served God. In ancient Egypt, such a person was known as the guard captain because of his powerful swordsmanship. Edward let out a furious roar, the long sword in his hand bursting with intense holy light. Using the strength of his waist, he circled and slashed with his crossguard, finally creating a relatively safe golden circle before the Death Guard arrived. There was not a single living Death Guard within the length of his arm and his sword. Edward looked at the Death Guard captain with a serious expression. He had already regarded it as the most terrifying enemy he had ever faced in this world. He held the sword horizontally, the hilt level with his shoulder. He looked at the tip of the sword, and all the holy power in his body was ready to be unleashed. At this moment, a green vine that looked like a python or a dragon popped up from under his feet and quickly grabbed onto Edward's right leg. The snake-like carnivorous vine with long fangs bit toward Edward's thigh. Venomous vine! Why, Elizabeth shouted anxiously. She quickly waved her wand, trying to cast a protective armor on Edward. However, the venomous vine that Immoden had modified with the power of the curse was even more poisonous than when it was in the hands of a druid. Edward could already feel his right leg itching and numbing. The poison had penetrated through the armor and into his body. The venomous vine's snake-like fangs were even more poisonous. If he let it enter his blood, the consequences would be unimaginable. What's more, there was also the Death Guard captain who was rushing toward him with a sword. Edward didn't know how many times he had cursed Hans and his teammate. They were dead, but he didn't know how many terrifying tricks they had left for Imogen. As soon as the venomous vine appeared, the captain of the nightmare team was in a desperate situation. If Edward swung his sword to deal with the venomous vine, then the Death Guard captain's sword would pierce through his vitals. If he ignored this venomous snake, who knew what would happen? Just when Edward was about to lose all hope, a flash of sword light appeared behind him. Luo Xing lowered his body and swung his sword. When the venomous vine pounced toward Edward's throat, he cut off the head of the vine. The fanged mouth fell into the dust, and Edward let out a sigh of relief. His long sword slashed forward, parrying the long sword of the Death God's guard. The flash of sword light in Luo Xing's hand was like a swimming dragon or a lightning bolt, leaping through the throat of a nearby jackal-headed man. The two cooperated with each other and actually suppressed the Death Guard captain. Edward's swordsmanship was like a knife chopping and an axe chopping, forming the framework for the joint attack. It was also up to him to quickly destroy the enemy's attack. Luo Xing's sword light was like a butcher dismembering an ox, skillfully and easily filling in the flesh and blood of Edward's swordsmanship. When the jackal-headed man's attack was broken, Luo Xing's sword would pierce into the gap and reap the enemy's life like a scythe. Elizabeth came back to her senses. With tears in her eyes, she set up iron armor for the two on the battlefield. At the same time, she waved her wand rapidly, desperately adding layers of obstacles in front of the two on the front line. Curtain of darkness. Elizabeth heard someone behind her shout in a low voice. Black fog floated several feet in front of Edward and Luo Xing, blocking the Death Guard's sight. Protect against long-range weapons. Another protective spell was cast on the two. The arrows shot by the archers in the rear of the Death Guard formation were slid away by a smooth force field before they could reach the two. Then, countless bats flew out from the entrance of the pyramid behind Elizabeth and plunged into the curtain of darkness. Some of them lay on the jackal-headed man's throat and sucked blood, while others carried corrosive blood flames. A bat transformed into a human in the air. The pale-faced David pierced the chest of a Death Guard with his aristocratic foil sword. Then another figure rushed out. David's body expanded several times, and the axe in his hand chopped down with unstoppable force, sending two Death Guards flying. The Arabian was agile, and the two scimitars in his hands drew two strange curves, slashing across the neck of a Death Guard. The 5 Samsara travelers quickly expanded the battlefield, creating a defensive circle of about 15 feet, back-to-back with each other, protecting the entrance of the pyramid and Elizabeth behind them. Luo Xing and Edward worked together, and after several rounds, finally created an opportunity. Luo Xing's sword light was like a swimming dragon. He leaped into the air and lightly borrowed the strength of a Death Guard's spear. There was a sword cry, and like a flash of lightning in the air, Edward only saw a biting cold sword light piercing through the air. Even though the target was not him, he still felt chills all over his body. The sword light tore through the golden defensive circle of the Death Guard's steady swordsmanship, and in the nick of time pierced its throat. Although it seemed to be only a sword mark, in fact, its entire body was pierced by the sword chi. Edward was dumbfounded. The great difference between the two swordsmanship systems made it difficult for him to understand what was happening in front of him. Even Imogen, who was surrounded by the death priests, could not help but look solemn for a moment when he saw the dazzling sword light. Then, he bent his palm like a hook and stretched it forward. A force containing the power of the curse broke through the air and tore at Luo Xing. Imogen's attack was not exquisite, but his power was as deep as the sea. Luo Xing only felt an unparalleled force coming at him, like an avalanche with hidden killing intent. Under this dark claw mark, even his soul seemed to be shaken, and he only felt that his mind was muddled. His life was hanging by a thread, but he was unable to fight back. Edward stepped forward with his sword, but before he could block it, he felt a sharp pain in his head, and almost could not hold the crossed sword in his hand. Chapter 665. Imogen's attack was earth-shattering, temporarily crippling Luoxing, who posed the greatest threat to him among the reincarnators. It was also at this moment that the situation took a complete turn. The Death God's guard silently surged forward like a tide. The tall jackal-headed man wielding a heavy weapon stood out and became the center of the battle formation. The agile jackal-headed man wielding a dagger and trident was an assassin among the Death God's guards who was proficient in surprise attacks and assassination. They were agile and unafraid of death, often willing to risk their lives to create opportunities for their companions. A few Death God's guards wielding javelins and bows were responsible for providing support from the rear while protecting the two priests who had separated from Imogen. They only spent a few breaths on the battlefield to reorganize the battle formation according to the reincarnators. 6 Death God's guards wielding long halberds were responsible for locking down the reincarnators' weapons, while 5 short Death God's guards wielding knives were responsible for blocking the reincarnators' long-range attack. The Death God's guards wielding long weapons stood in the front row, while the Death God's guards wielding short weapons stuck close to the back of the Death God's guards. When Edward and the others saw the jackal-headed man's movements, their faces were as ugly as death. The number of troops they faced was less than half of the Death God's guards they had just killed. However, an organized enemy was completely different from an unorganized enemy. Before they could make a targeted arrangement, the reincarnators would face unprecedented pressure. Before reaching the 8-star level, the reincarnators were most afraid of such large-scale, organized enemies. Players who had played role-playing games knew that the scariest thing in a game wasn't the boss, but the swarm of small monsters. Players could easily slaughter these small monsters one by one. Once a certain number of small monsters reached a certain number, and with all classes, it would be a nightmare. When facing such a large group of enemies, those who knew how to cooperate and those who didn't were on 2 different levels. For those who didn't know how to cooperate, the reincarnators could still make use of the limited contact space during close combat to achieve the effect of limiting the number of enemies they could come into contact with at the same time. When the Death God's guards had attacked, Edward had only faced 4 or 5 enemies at the same time in his most difficult time. When the 5 of them coordinated with each other, they were able to guarantee that each of them would not face more than 3 enemies, and they did not need to pay too much attention to their blind spots. This was how they managed to achieve greater results, killing and injuring dozens of Death God's guard. But now, Imogen had adjusted the battle formation, separating the Samsara travelers from the battlefield. With 2 jackal-headed Death Guard captains as the backbone, they had reorganized the battle formation. Although the number of enemies they were facing did not seem to have increased, the tacit understanding between these Death Guard captains was like moving clouds and flowing water. With 3 to 5 of them working as one, the threat they posed had increased exponentially. The jackal-headed men had paid a small price to separate the reincarnators from the battlefield. After retreating from the pyramid, they had accumulated an even greater force, and their formation was no longer restricted by the reincarnators. Now, the situation on the battlefield had been completely reversed. Imogen raised his right hand high, and the death priest beside him blew the horn. The sound of the horn was melodious and heavy, resounding throughout the entire battlefield. Dozens of Death God's guards, who had already set up their battle formation, were the first to pounce on the reincarnators. The jackal-headed men wielding heavy hammers, halberds, and other long-handled weapons were the first to swing their weapons at Edward and the others. Behind them, the agile Death God's guard wielding a scimitar lowered his body and lowered his head into a half-squat. He was like a jackal that was running on all fours. Blade light blossomed from the waist of the halberd-wielding and hammer-wielding guards, and a streak of blade light slashed at the waist of the reincarnators. Above the reincarnators, the halberds and hammers were raised high and chopped down. The 2 halberd-wielding guards worked together, and a scimitar-wielding guard was like a killer move. None of the reincarnators were weak. They used their own unique skills and barely managed to hold on under the exquisite cooperation of the Death God's guards. But in the end, the pressure was unbearable. David's body swelled to twice its original size. He had been stabbed in the ribs. Relying on his recovery ability, it was not a big problem, but there was still a gap in his cooperation with the others. The assassin guard beside him took advantage of this gap and rushed into the core of the Reincarnator's battle formation. At this time, the Reincarnators not only had to face the fierce attacks from the front, but they also had to guard against the arrows from the back. David exchanged injury for injury. Taking the opportunity of being hit by a heavy blade, he broke the sternum of the scimitar guard and sent him flying back. But immediately, someone else took his place. David's recovery ability was strong, but the opponents seemed to be endless. Instead, he could not withstand the pressure and was separated further and further away from the other Reincarnators. After David was separated, the Death God's guards did not give the Reincarnators a chance to adjust. Instead, they pressed forward. Except for Luo Sheng and Edward, who cooperated well with each other, the others were separated from the battlefield. The Reincarnators were separated from the small group of 5 people and Elizabeth, a long-range attacker, into 4 independent groups. The Reincarnators faced the joint attack of 2 halberd-wielding guards, a scimitar guard and a dagger assassin. They also had to be careful of the arrows of the archers and the strange spells of the priests. For a moment they were flustered and in danger. David was injured several times, and the situation was not optimistic. The other Death God's guards had already bypassed them and attacked the Great Pyramid. Unlike the small team that faced them, the Death God's guards directly fought with Chen Ang's vampires in a large-scale battle formation. The halberd-wielding guards stood at the forefront. Their barbed halberds were ready to hook the vampires' feet from the pyramid at any time. If a vampire in black was unlucky enough to be hooked by them, they would immediately be chopped into meat paste by the scimitar guards behind them. The archers and priests standing at the back of the formation accurately launched a rain of arrows and spells at the places where the formation of the vampires in black was unstable. Another group of Death God's guards attacked from the sides and the back. They were preparing to attack the Great Pyramid of Giza from all sides. If one looked down from the sky, they would see a black tide of Death God's guards surrounding the entire Great Pyramid of Giza. Some of them had already climbed onto the Great Pyramid of Giza and were preparing to shoot at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Imogen watched as Chen Ang's battle line was on the verge of collapse. However, there was no trace of arrogance on his face. The Samsara travelers were drowned in the tide of undead. The Death God's guards were coming at them from all directions. There was danger everywhere. David's chest was pierced by a halberd, but he did not even have the chance to pull it out. He could only watch as the others twisted the halberd in his chest. His strength was slowly drained out of his body along with his blood. 2 halberds locked onto his weapon, one on the left and one on the right. The vicious assassin took the opportunity to stab a dagger into David's spine, cutting off his senses in the lower half of his body. David was on the brink of despair. He roared at the sky in anger, but he was smashed in the head by a huge hammer. David was also in a bad situation. He was cursed by the Death God's guards. He tried to drink the recovery potion from the god's space several times, but the Death God's guards always interrupted him. Since vampires had high agility, he was able to dodge the attacks at first. However, the space he had to move around was extremely limited. If it were not for the powerful recovery ability of the vampires, he would have died a long time ago. The Arabian was terrified. He worked together with a veiled woman and had the woman block a knife for him several times. Thus, he was still in good condition. However, the woman was in imminent danger, and he was afraid that he would not be able to hold on for long. Elizabeth hid in the passage of the pyramid. Alone, she faced the saturated attacks from the opposite side. It was difficult for her to provide any effective support to Edward. Moreover, a few Death God's guards were trying to bypass Edward and rush towards her. The situation was extremely critical. A death god's guard wielding a sword rushed in front of Chen Ong. His sword trembled in front of Chen Ong. The death god's guard roared and slashed his sword 3 times. The tip of the sword swung towards Chen Ong. A figure flashed beside Chen Ong, and the death god's guard's head flew high into the air. Looking at Imodin, who was looking up at him, Chen Ong smiled and made a shooting gesture. Bang! Chen Ong mimicked the sound of a gunshot. Looking at the unpredictable expression on Imodin's face, Yinglong held his sword, which was still dripping with blood. He silently guarded in front of Chen Ong. Chen Ong acted as if he did not see what was happening around him. He said indifferently, Imodin, you still need to learn. Your brain is still from 3,000 years ago. You don't have a deep understanding of the giant ships and cannons of our imperialism. How can I hand over the task of liberating Egypt and all of humanity to you? Chapter 666. Dozens of biplanes flew across the Nile River and headed toward the Great Pyramid of Giza. They were the Camel fighter jets designed by the British Sopwith Company. Of course, they had been modified so much that even the Sopwith Company's designers could not recognize them. This type of World War I plane had a maximum speed of 195 km per hour and an altitude of 5,800 meters. Chen Ong had modified it to be close to the standard of World War II planes. Even Chen Ong could not overcome the inherent speed of the biplanes. However, Chen Ong had made full use of its excellent flight stability. The 2 machine guns on the plane had also been modified by Chen Ong into cannons. When the plane was close to the ground, a series of fire chains shot out from the 2 humps of the camel and swept across the formation of Imodin's Reaper Guards. The great power of the cannons cut the jackals in half. The engine of the camel had been modified by magic. Because of the aerodynamic force of the wings, its carrying capacity was even greater than that of most monoplanes of World War II. On the wings of the plane, 2 mummies let go of their hands and dived down. These newly modified vampire mummies had half of their bodies turned into sand, and the other half glided with their bat wings. They accurately threw themselves into the key positions of Imodin's Reaper army. Their bodies turned into sand in midair, turning into a sandstorm. When these mummies got close to the ground, they suddenly burst into flames. The huge sandstorm that covered a distance of more than 10 meters was instantly engulfed in flames. The bombs that were dropped by the mummies also detonated for the first time. A large amount of white phosphorus incendiary and epoxy ethane were sprayed evenly on the battlefield, covering Imodin's army like a cloud. Then, the flaming mummies set everything on fire. Chen Ong had prepared everything according to the specifications of fuel-air bombs. Due to technical reasons, he could not create the most lethal pressure field. However, the incendiary that had been modified by magic potions was much more powerful than similar products. Chen Ong had even used Elizabeth's fire curse as a reference. Under the guidance of the Great Pyramid of Giza's magic barrier, the fire around the Great Pyramid of Giza silently changed its nature. The fire that targeted souls and curses turned dark red, just like the magma of hell. This hellfire was unprecedentedly destructive to the Death God's guards. In an instant, the number of Death God's guards that fell was several times more than the number that died in battle before. Imodin's army was instantly dealt a heavy blow. A whistling sound came from the sky. Imodin had just torn apart 2 camels in anger when he sensed an unfamiliar sense of urgency in front of him. He had never heard that kind of whistling sound before. The Samsara travelers who were lucky enough to escape the fire almost peed their pants. David almost fell to the ground. The injury on his spine had not recovered yet. He limped toward the tunnel leading to the pyramid. The Samsara travelers were very familiar with that sound. It was the sound of the King of War, the roar of the cannons. However, when he and the other captains who were lucky enough to escape arrived at the entrance of the tunnel, they heard a slight rustling sound coming from inside. It sounded like a rattlesnake slithering over tiny grains of sand. Deep inside the tunnel, Even with the eyes of the samsara travelers, they could only see a blurry shadow. Edward and the others immediately raised their vigilance. They saw a few wriggling snake-like shadows in the distance. As the mysterious shadows got closer, they finally saw the identity of the shadows. Giant octopuses covered in mucus wriggled in front of them. The tentacles of the octopuses were equipped with drills, guns with a completely different structure, and tentacles with strange horns and fangs that spread out at the end of their tails. When they reached the middle of the path, the octopuses suddenly sped up. Their tails hit the ground as they leaped forward quickly, like a jumping fish. The leading octopus walked past the samsara travelers without hesitation. It plunged into the sand and disappeared into the desert as if it was swimming. More octopuses swarmed out of the pyramids. They came from the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the narrow north-south passage above the pyramids, and from behind the giant rocks that had been moved away from the pyramid. All of them swarmed out of the pyramids like a fountain. Most of them went straight into the desert through secret underground tunnels. Some of them held guns in all 8 of their tentacles and fired in all directions. Some operated cannons and missiles. Powerful firepower poured down from the 3 pyramids. The vampire octopuses clung to the pyramids and operated the machine guns and cannons. They also used their sharpest tentacles to pierce the chests of the Grim Reapers. There were also some strange insects that were only half the height of a human and shaped like a praying mantis. They moved like phantoms in the middle of the battlefield. Their 2 appendages quickly swept past the vital parts of the Grim Reapers. They were as fast as lightning, but their sickle-like appendages were even faster. In a flash, they would reap the heads of the Grim Reapers. Under the sand, the vampire octopuses that had undergone special modifications could swim in the desert as if they were swimming in the sea. Their tentacles pierced out from the ground, and the drills tore through the bodies of the Grim Reapers. Muffled gunshots could be heard coming from underground. Immoden's army not only had to deal with the bullets nearby, but they also had to guard against the sniper shots coming from underground. In the direction of Cairo, Immoden saw a long line of armored vehicles rapidly approaching. The second round of air raids was about to come. Immoden did not think that these were his reinforcements. Every time Immoden prepared to turn the tables with magic, the huge boundary formed by the 3 pyramids interfered with him. Immoden's goal of probing had been achieved. He understood that he could not threaten Chun-Ong this time. Therefore, Immoden looked in the direction of Chun-Ong on the pyramid and curled his lips slightly. His cold and cruel eyes were completely different from before. Then, he whispered in ancient Egyptian, "I will be back. The next time I come back, I will bring the curse of the gods and my army of the Grim Reapers to you. At that moment, the undying hatred of the undead will bathe the entire earth in blood." Chun-Ong looked at Immoden's back and said softly, "I'm looking forward to it." The moment the sun completely rose from the ground, the world suddenly darkened. The rising sun was swallowed by the abyss of darkness. At that moment, the entire Egypt was so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. The residents of Cairo were already frightened by the events of the night. The moment they were swallowed by the darkness, they screamed and screamed in fear. However, the battlefield near the Great Pyramid of Giza fell into silence at that moment. It was as if the battlefield had fallen into silence for a moment. Edward could clearly hear his own breathing. In the darkness, time seemed like a year to him. Finally, after a quarter of an hour, the sun dominated the land again. The Grim Reapers on the battlefield had disappeared without a trace. Even their heavily injured corpses were gone. Everything felt like an illusion. If it were not for the smoke and the smell of blood, Edward would have thought that he had fallen into Immoden's illusion. The last song of the 10 disasters, the dark disaster. Chun-Ong sighed. The 10 disasters of Cairo are finally over. Chapter 667. When the morning sun of a new day shone on Cairo, Chun-Ong appeared on the streets of Cairo with the Blood Clan guards. Yesterday, Immoden's burning of the city did not have a serious impact on Cairo. Even the port area, which was the hardest hit, had been put out with the help of Horus I, and peace was restored. Although there were still traces of disaster left in the city by the meteors and hailstones, Cairo had restored order. Chun-Ong had finally succeeded in dragging out the mission in this world. Before Imodin died, they could all stay in this world. Of course, Imodin's strength was rising every moment, but this was Chun-Ang's goal. He needed a chess piece to destroy the current world order and create chaos that affected the whole world. In Chun-Ang's plan for the undead empires in the east and the west, Imodin currently did not have enough strength to challenge the Western powers, so Chun-Ong had to give him more. On the one hand, the Egyptian gods supported Imodin, and on the other hand, he had to let Imodin understand the horror of modern technology. Chun-Ong did not think that a group of undead with cold weapons could threaten the British and French imperialists. The runic power that Imodin mastered definitely had the potential to create an unprecedented magic civilization. Chun-Ong was still counting on him to lead the Death Army, drive the magic mobile armor, and engineer mechanical troops to attack London, and turn Great Britain into a country of undead. It's a pity that there are no teams among the reincarnators that strengthen the magic system related to World of Warcraft. Otherwise, I would want to forge Frostmourne again and send Imodin to the throne of ice. Chun-Ong said to Zhang Ziqiang with a smile. Again? Zhang Ziqiang was stunned. Are you saying that you've forged once before? Chun-Ong smiled and did not answer. They had arrived in front of the largest temple of the Saint Truth in Cairo. When the warriors of the Saint Truth in front of the temple saw Chun-Ong and a large group of black-clothed guards wearing the symbol of the Eye of Horus, they suddenly became nervous. They pressed their hands on their machetes. At this time, it was the morning ritual of the Saint Truth, one of the 5 services of the Saint Truth. The temple was full of believers of the Saint Truth. Those believers were devoutly looking in the direction of Mecca in the east, with their buttocks in the air and their heads bowed. Chun-Ong barged into the temple directly. The 2 warriors guarding the door looked at the solemn and capable black-clothed vampire behind him and didn't dare to stop him. Chun-Ang's boots made contact with the marble slabs in the temple, producing a crisp sound. The worshippers raised their heads, wanting to see who was so bold as to disturb the worship of the sacred god. Wasn't he afraid that Allah would punish him, or that the priests would self-destruct? Chun-Ong stood in the direction where they were kowtowing and looked down at the believers who were kneeling in front of him. The worshippers on the ground were in a commotion. Chun-Ong said to them in Arabic, "No one is allowed to stand up. As the local lord, the Holy Sultan, your master and ruler, I have something to say to you." A priest in a white robe who was leading the worship stood up angrily and shouted, "The infidel is not worthy of being our lord. Without our recognition, the Sultan of Egypt will not be recognized by the Islamic law. It is illegal." Chun-Ong did not say a word. He pointed at him and said, "Him." Then he pointed at the people who stood up with the priest and said, "Him, and him. Don't let any of these people who stand up go." The Blood clan beside him did not hold a gun. Instead, they raised their bows and aimed. The arrows of the Blood clan were as accurate as sniper rifles. Very soon, the iron arrowhead of a rough wooden longsword pierced through the chest of the priest, sending his body flying backward. He fell onto the mat in the crowd. The sound of the bowstring sounded without any delay. It was as orderly as the strings of a musical instrument. The dull sound of the bowstring bouncing sounded in the air. It was like an overture, accompanied by the sound of the arrow entering the human body and the moans and screams of the worshippers on the ground. It was a sad song for the followers of the gospel of truth. In the eyes of Chun-Ong, their lives had no value at all. Even if they were used as magic materials, they would depreciate due to the great purge that would inevitably be carried out next. There would no longer be a lack of human test subjects in the land of Egypt. Human lives would also become the cheapest thing in Chun-Ang's hands. They would become the Blood clan coming off the production line and become cheap consumables in magic experiments and scientific research. Worship 5 times a day, 1.5 hours each time. Chen Ong waved his finger in front of the followers of the Gospel of Truth and said, "Ghosts have time to wait for you. Other than scriptures and dogma in your heads, you want this and that. You don't eat this and that, you don't coexist with the people of this race, and you grimace at the slightest thing. Did I hire you to work? Even the undead are more adapted to industrialization than you. I came to Egypt to start a business to bring you happiness. Why don't you understand? Isn't being a worker happier than being a slave? I created a miracle in the history of human industry. Within 3 years, I turned Egypt into an industrialized country. Can't you maintain your dedication? Dedicate your life, dignity, soul, and so on. Anything that I think is valuable? The reason why I kept you here is because you are humans and have brains. You can do some work that the undead and machines can't do. But how did you repay me? Worship 5 times a day, delaying the progress of the assembly line, refusing to study, refusing to even use toilet paper. When I let the women come out to work, you rape them and strangle them to death. You are a group of industrial maggots that are not even comparable to the undead. If this goes on, my only choice is to turn all of you into undead. Do you really think that we capitalists are vegetarians? Let me tell you, I am a capitalist with knives and guns. I am a slave supervisor who talks with whips and chains. We do not accept that kind of low efficiency. But if you are really not willing to be laborers, then all of you can be industrial raw materials. I will use your souls as fuel and your flesh and blood as materials to create mummies, skeletons, golems, and puppets. Looking at the Blood Clan members in black dragging away the corpses in front of them, Chen Ong sneered and said, "I have had enough of you." Chen Ong told Ing Long, who was next to him, "Get ready to start the purge. Consume all the people in this country who are not suitable for industrialization. We need to quickly make Egypt a civilized country, quickly expand the population of the Blood Clan, and strengthen our control ability. At present, we can only control a few cities in Egypt. In the local areas, the tribal elders and chiefs have been unwilling to cooperate with our 1-year development plan. In that case, don't keep them. To build a strong and powerful grassroots organization, don't worry about consuming the population. Aren't there many black countries and white immigrants nearby? Once Egypt is cleaned up, go there and plunder the population." Ing Long replied, "Imidin seems to have left Egypt recently. According to the satellite, there are signs of large-scale massacres and blood sacrifices in the nearby black tribes. Should we go and stop him?" Chen Ong thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "There's no need. Let's do our job first and clean up Egypt. Imidin knows that using blood sacrifices to revive his army is not the most important thing. He knows that if he doesn't kill the great Emperor Magic Scorpion, he can only struggle at death's door forever. With Imidin's wisdom, it's not difficult for him to see that only by building a death god army with firearms and explosives can he fight against us. He won't stay for long. In the end, we still have to fight a bloody battle at the oasis where the great Emperor Magic Scorpion died. Now that he wants to know more about this world, we have to prepare to attack Suez. Imidin will definitely join in. If he doesn't come, the reincarnation team that has sided with him will remind him to come. Now in Egypt, we have to clean up the bugs of the Church of Truth and reorganize the organization. In this process, we will make full use of the reincarnation teams that have sided with us. Now that they are also shareholders, they should be able to show their faces. Chen Ong set his sights on the vast territory of Egypt that the Suez Canal passed through. Only by controlling this golden waterway could he make use of the advantage of transportation to quickly expand the influence of the Blood Clan under his command in the world. Raw materials, machinery, and technology from all over the world would take root in Egypt. It would be the necessary fertilizer for the seeds of the Republic of China to germinate. The vampire octopus had already sneaked into the Mediterranean Sea through the Nile River. As a civilization with a single consciousness, although their potential had been greatly weakened, as a foreshadowing, it was already strong enough. Chapter 668. In a haze that was like an illusion, Evelyn came to a splendid palace in a trance. In the distorted light and shadow, countless men and women wearing or not wearing the traditional robes of ancient Egypt snugged by shuttled back and forth in the magnificent hall. Most of them were dressed very lightly. Even the most distinguished priests and nobles only wore a simple linen robe. From Evelyn's point of view, the entire palace was simply immoral. When she retracted her gaze, she could not help but scream out loud. In the reflection of the gold ornaments, she saw her own appearance. She was wearing a long dress that was known as tunic in ancient Egypt, and her chest was almost exposed to the air. For a traditional woman in the 20th century, this could be regarded as a humiliation. However, the people around her weren't much better. Based on the simple and crude ancient Egyptian archaeology of the 20th century, Evelyn didn't know about some of the breakthroughs in modern archaeology regarding ancient Egypt. For example, the Egyptians' obsession with nudity. Due to being located in the tropics and the extremely underdeveloped textile industry during the ancient Egyptian civilization, the Egyptians were used to being naked. In the illusion, Evelyn was fortunate enough to see this precious historical information. Naked servants and waiters walked to and fro in the hall. Precious fresh fruits and food were served. The young children were all naked. The noblewomen and noblemen weren't any better. Evelyn saw her father's favorite concubine, Ansuna, exposing her dyed breasts while the high priest, Imidon, stared at them without blinking. This is simply immoral. Evelyn, who was educated in traditional Christianity, almost screamed. Of course, she didn't know that in early Christianity, prostitutes had the custom of doing business at the entrance of the church. Their largest group of customers were the priests in the church. In the Old Testament, King Solomon of Judah had once ordered people to disperse those women. For this reason, he had a conflict with the elders of the church. Wait! Evelyn finally came back to her senses. Why did I call that woman Ansuna? And why can I see Imidon? Who is the man I call father? Nina. She saw an old man with the most gorgeous jewelry waving at her enthusiastically amidst the crowd. Evelyn saw herself, hearing the old man's call. She walked towards him quickly and happily. The old man opened his arms and said loudly, "Nina, my most beautiful daughter, the Princess of Egypt, the brightest pearl on the Nile River." The surrounding people cheered. Evelyn even saw O'Connor among the cheering crowd. As a guard, he stood respectfully beside the priest of the sun god, serving the pharaoh. Next, Evelyn saw herself and Ansuna begin the duel, and Ansuna was more skilled and won. The pharaoh stood up and said, "The person who is suitable to protect me is my beloved concubine. And I will give the bracelet of death to my princess for safekeeping." Evelyn saw a strange bracelet made of gold placed in front of her. The bracelet looked like a scorpion, emitting a dazzling light unique to gold. Evelyn looked at the gorgeous bracelet, as if her entire soul was attracted to it. She stared at it in a daze until her soul floated up and was sucked into the bracelet by an invisible force of attraction. Evelyn shuddered. She screamed and woke up from her nightmare. O'Connor, who was next door, shouted, "Evelyn, what happened?" When he rushed in from outside the door, he saw Evelyn clutching the blanket and looking at the void in front of her in horror. O'Connor asked anxiously, and she replied, "It's nothing, O'Connor, I had a nightmare." O'Connor walked to her bedside and comforted her, saying, "It should be because of that adventure. Ever since you came back from Hamunata, you have been in deep thought, hiding a great deal of depression in your heart. Everything is over, those people will not come back to find us. Listen, tomorrow we will leave Cairo by ship and head to London. Although those people are very scary, the gold they provided us is enough for you to study in England." O'Connor said gently, "Now that Cairo has fallen into the hands of the Eye of Horus, the entire city is killing people. Those ruthless men in black are not only killing the local believers, but also taking over all the functions of the Egyptian government. Now, other than the area around the Suez Canal, which is still safe with England's protection, the rest of Egypt has become a nightmare on earth. No, O'Connor. Evelyn shook her head. It's not over, far from it. We can't escape this whirlpool. This is something that is fated. I am the princess of ancient Egypt, and you are the guard of Ra. The monster that ran out from Hamunata is the lover of my father's favorite concubine, Ansuna. The high priest, your immediate superior, Imidin. This is all your illusion. O'Connor interrupted her. You are too nervous, so you treated the archaeological materials you studied during the day as your own memory. This is just a nightmare. Practice for a while and you will be fine. O'Connor passed the blanket to her and repeated, Tomorrow we will leave Cairo and take a boat from the Suez Canal to London. Soon we will be far away from this nightmare. After O'Connor turned and left, Evelyn was stunned for a long time. She said to herself, Ansuna and Imidin conspired to kill the pharaoh? That's why Imidin suffered the most terrible punishment in Egypt, the insect bite. As for the priests who are bitten by the insects, their magic power will become stronger and stronger in this eternal torture. When they break the seal, they will destroy Cairo. They will cause the 10 catastrophes by the Nile River, turn the river into blood, and let the heavenly fire burn Cairo. Evelyn matched the legend recorded in the documents with what had happened not long ago. She hugged her head in horror and said, So, the divine punishment that tried to destroy Egypt not long ago was the curse of Imidin? Right, the bracelet of death. Evelyn quietly stood up and rummaged through the documents she had packed. She rummaged through the messy pile of documents and found a photocopy of a document. The bracelet of the Grim Reaper should be here. In the records of the ancient Egyptian Scorpion King, the Scorpion King sold his soul to Anubis when he was defeated and on the verge of death. In return, he obtained an incomparably mystical treasure that could recruit the dead in the underworld as warriors. This should be the bracelet of death. In that dream, I was the princess of ancient Egypt. Through a martial arts competition, I obtained the bracelet of death, and Ansuna was responsible for protecting my father, the pharaoh Djoser. In the end, she and her lover, Imidin, killed my father. What the hell? No wonder I hate Ansuna so much. That's not all. The voice that came from behind Evelyn almost made her scream. However, she soon realized that she could not make a sound. She turned around in horror and saw the nightmarish man standing behind her, looking at her calmly. Chenong said calmly, You hate your Aunt Ansuna so much. I guess it's also because you two are rivals in love, right? Aunt Ansuna? Evelyn's mouth was wide open. She realized that she could make a sound again. She said, Rival in love? Are you saying that I like Imidin? No, I can't have an affair with him. Chen Eng's expression was very rich. He smiled and said with interest, Of course not Imidin. Then why did you? Evelyn suddenly froze. She said in horror, No, it can't be like this. You mean, yes. If Ansuna had not killed the pharaoh, you would have been the pharaoh's queen. The princess of Egypt, the pharaoh's bride-to-be. Ansuna is your father's sister. If your father had not died, you would have married him. If he had died, you would have married his son, your elder brother. As an archaeologist, you should know that in the pharaoh's royal family, women also have the right to inherit. Therefore, in order to prevent the royal power from falling, the pharaoh would marry their own sisters, or even daughters, to a boy like O'Connor. Chenong said emotionally, What a chaotic royal family! Chapter 669. Betrayal. Imidin sneered. There has never been any betrayal. It was only because of shameful, disgusting nonsense. Ansuna is King Djoser's younger sister, and I am powerful enough to marry her. However, King Djoser is a bastard. In order to protect his power, he married Nina's mother, who is second only to him, as his wife. When he was middle-aged, he married the youngest daughter of the former pharaoh. My Ansuna, Imodin said angrily. At that time, his daughter Nina was about the same age as Ansuna. That little bitch. She wanted to frame Ansuna so that her father would shamelessly marry her. Imodin's body trembled slightly. He gritted his teeth and cursed. I hate these ignorant, shameless mortals and those disgusting gods. The so-called divine marriage law, the so-called noble bloodline, the descendants born of deformed, twisted, and terrifying. I have personally dealt with several deformed monsters for King Djoser. Those monsters were born with great power. Their life forms were distorted, and they were born with a curse. Some of them were even more powerful than their parent. In order to cover up this shameless behavior, the pharaohs declared that they were abominations of God, monsters born from the noble bloodline of Ra. These monsters were born with great power, but their lives were completely distorted. So the pharaoh would hand them over to the priests. Some of the priests would burn them, and some would send them to the underworld for Anubis to watch. It was only later that I understood why the gods had created such a shameless law. It was because they needed it. At that time, the world was no longer suitable for them to live in. In order to maintain their power, they needed the product of the distortion of divinity, the abominations. Anubis collected these existences for them to eat and replenish their divine power. And we. Imodin's eyes were extremely terrifying. He turned his head and said word by word, "Are there accomplices?" Behind Imodin, the leader of the Yama team, Shintugong, frowned. He bowed and said, "Your Highness, please be careful with your words. They can't hear what we're saying here. My servant, although I despise it, I am already one of them. In my domain, they can't investigate." Imodin sighed. The army that existence sent to fight me feels very familiar. That bloodthirsty impulse, that evil essence, it reminds me of some memories from when I was a priest. In the inheritance of the high priest, there seems to be such a thing recorded. There was a great pharaoh whose concubine was cursed by a demon. When he sucked the curse out of her wound, he was also infected and had to live on blood from then on. Imodin scoffed at this legend. Of course, this is the shameless falsification of history by those in power. That's not the devil, but the sin of God. They are the products of the distorted bloodline of the descendants of gods. What the priests offer to Anubis are the divine sins that are obviously distorted. However, those who do not show it, and those whose distorted nature is hidden even deeper, become the children of gods, the noble pharaohs. And some become the concubine of the pharaoh. This kind of divine sin that lives on blood should be awakened when a certain pharaoh came into contact with his concubine's blood. The distorted nature of both sides infected each other and awakened. It is a brand new, relatively stable divine sin. It is also a brand new species, and that pharaoh is the origin of this species. He will have unprecedented power that is comparable to the gods. The blood race of this world is actually born like this. Shintugong of the Yama team was secretly shocked. Shintu. Imodin accurately knew the real name of the Yama team leader. He slowly turned his head and said, "I know that you came to follow me for other purposes, but I don't care. There is no loyalty in this world, and I don't ask for loyalty. I will let you do what you want, but you have to consider the risk of disobeying me. Do you understand?" Imodin's eyes seemed to pry open Shintugong's brain, making him feel like he was transparent, unable to hide anything. Shintugong was shocked. Damn it, what kind of medicine did the 9 provinces give Imodin? Why did he suddenly become so cunning? Without the poison of love, I really wouldn't be able to deal with Imodin. His entire person has ascended. Shintugong secretly cursed. Imhotep pondered for a moment and said to Shintugong, "Even if I kill the demon scorpion great emperor and completely control the death bracelet, it will still be difficult to deal with that existence. Therefore, I need some more powerful forces to help me. When I was the high priest, out of pity, I secretly spared the lives of some abominations who were not extremely twisted. It should be because of this that I lost the favor of Anubis. This later became one of the evidence of my crimes. These sons of the Pharaoh that I adopted were all sacrificed to Anubis, but I know that they were not devoured by the gods. Instead, they are still sealed in the underworld. These people are loyal to me, and I owe them a favor. Immoden's voice was deep. Now, my servant Shin-Tu, go and retrieve the black scripture of the undead. I will personally release them and borrow their powerful strength. Shin-Tu Gong said softly, Yes, His Holiness Immoden. He turned around and walked out of the palace. This was a temple in the desert. This was one of the palaces that Immoden had once used to be the high priest. It had been buried under the yellow sand, and the Yama team had cleared an entrance. Immoden stayed in the temple. Shin-Tu Gong knew very well that Immoden did not want Anubis to know about this, so he needed the Book of the Undead to bypass death and enter the underworld. As for why Immoden did not want Anubis to know about this, Shin-Tu Gong had a guess in his heart. He wanted to kill a god. Kill a god. Shin-Tu Gong smiled slightly. Of course, he would not stop this matter. On the contrary, he would do his best to facilitate it. And Immoden clearly saw this, which was why he said that he was not loyal, but still entrusted this treacherous and dangerous matter to him. This was because Immoden could see very clearly that these reincarnators were filled with greed for benefit. From the depths of their souls they clamored, "Make a big scoop!" For a group of people who wished for the world to be in chaos, it was perfect to leave this matter to them. This was because Immoden himself was wandering on the edge of madness. Sometimes, even Immoden himself did not know what he wanted to do. Was it revenge? Or was it the destruction of everything? Immoden looked at Shin-Tu Gong's back. He was not worried that this person who chased after benefits and chaos would not be able to complete the task. He already knew what Chen-Ong wanted to do. He wanted to kill a god. For this, Chen-Ong would probably raise both hands in support. He had even single-handedly pushed Immoden to this position because of this. Chen-Ong would return the undead Black Sutra to him without revealing anything. Immoden believed this without a doubt. However, he had always concealed one thing. The place where the abominations were sealed in the underworld not only imprisoned the abominations that he had secretly taken in, but also imprisoned the craziest and most twisted abominations that even the gods did not dare to absorb. In fact, the abominations that the gods devoured were the weakest and the least twisted. As for the most twisted and powerful abominations, even the gods did not dare to approach them unless they wanted to lose themselves and become extremely crazy. These abominations were exiled to the deepest part of the underworld when they were at their weakest. If they did not have the permission of the gods, they would never be able to take a step out. After a few thousand years, these abominations would definitely become extremely powerful and could even threaten the gods. The soul behind Immoden's eyes was dark and deep, like an abyss that was deeper than the deepest part of the underworld. He said in a low voice, "The throne in the sky will suddenly fall. The sacred temples of the gods will burn. The gods will wail. They will fall to the earth, and the earth will be devoured by the abyss below. In this disaster, no one will be saved. I will conquer them. I will not fear the darkness, because I am already in the abyss. There is no existence that is darker than me." In front of Immoden was an exquisite coffin. Inside, there was a set of white bones that were made of spices and gold. With a light pinch, the almost rotten white bones would turn into powder. Immoden piously pressed his forehead against the coffin. He wailed in pain and struggled. His soul sank deeper into the abyss. The soul of his former lover, Ansuna, was struggling to die. This process was still ongoing. It was like drowning, slow and painful. Chapter 670. O'Connor was already waiting at the port of Giza in Cairo. Evelyn and her brother had just arrived. The port of Giza was the largest port in Cairo. They could reach the estuary delta by following the Nile River and choosing the waterway closest to the Suez Canal. There were many ports in Egypt there, and it was also the exit of the Suez Canal that connected to the Mediterranean Sea. They were going to Port Said, where they would board a British ship that sailed out of the Suez Canal. They would sail through the Strait of Gibraltar to London. There were British troops stationed along the banks of the Suez Canal. O'Connor and the others still did not believe that the Eye of Horus had expanded its influence there. They had no doubt about the power of Britain. Even in Cairo, the Eye of Horus's power had reached an unbridled level. However, O'Connor was still willing to believe that the government of the United Kingdom had control over the Suez Canal. The port of Giza was located on the left bank of the Nile River, opposite the Great Pyramid of Giza. Evelyn stared at the three magnificent pyramids on the other side of the river. In the middle, the tallest Great Pyramid of Giza, dozens of men in black with the Eye of Horus's swords were guarding the top of the pyramid. Evelyn could vaguely see a mysterious figure on the top of the pyramid. She was not sure if it was an illusion, but she felt that the person was watching them. "O'Connor!" Evelyn called out worriedly, "Someone is watching us." "Where?" O'Connor took out his binoculars and looked in the direction that Evelyn was pointing. He was surprised to see Chen Ong standing on the top of the pyramid and smiling at them. O'Connor put down the binoculars in panic and turned his head. "There's no one. Let's get on the boat." He hurriedly pulled Evelyn onto the passenger ship. Evelyn felt even more uneasy. She kept looking at the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza and asked doubtfully, "Really? O'Connor, why do I feel that you are lying to me? Someone is watching us." At the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza, Zhang Ziqiang hurriedly found Chen Ong and said, "There must be a reason why Imogen came here 2 days ago. The bracelet of death hides the location of the pyramid built by the great Emperor Scorpion, the coordinates of the Amzi oasis. It was buried in the ancient temple of Thebes. After it was excavated by Imogen, he had to pass through the Pyramid of Giza, the Temple of Karnak, the Temple of Philae, and the Temple of Abu Simbel to obtain further coordinates before locking onto the Amzi oasis." Chen Ong smiled and said, "When we attacked the Pyramid of Giza 2 days ago, Imogen should have already obtained the other coordinates. Yesterday, we received information that Imogen and the others have excavated another buried temple. It should be the location of another part of the Temple of Karnak. Now, they should be heading to Aswan to find the hidden coordinates of the Temple of Philae. Meanwhile, we have to clear the Suez Canal before we fight Imogen in the Amzi oasis." Chen Ong sighed and said, "Even without the Spear of Judgment in our hands, Imogen could still kill the great Emperor Scorpion. However, if we don't add fuel to the fire, wouldn't we be letting go of an opportunity?" Chen Ong pressed a hidden mechanism in the scepter in his hand. At the end of the scepter, a golden spear tip suddenly appeared. The Spear of Judgment had completely changed its form. Its tip was inlaid with a round diamond. This was the head of the Apollo scepter, which hid the secret of the Ark of the Covenant. The diamond seemed to be condensing the endless light of the sun, and this light was channeled into the tip of the spear below. Chen Ong gently shook his wrist, and the tip of the Spear of Judgment shot out an incandescent ray, cutting a giant rock hundreds of meters away in half. Taking a closer look at the tip of the Spear of Judgment, it was as if all the sunlight in the surrounding hundreds of meters was concentrated on the tip of the needle. Under the bright light, extreme destruction was brewing. "I left the dark scripture at the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Imogen will send someone to retrieve it soon. Don't stop them. As for the trip to the Amzi oasis, he will wait for us." Zhang Ziqiang was confused. "Why would he wait for us?" "To be precise, he is waiting for the Spear of Judgment in our hands." Chen Ong explained with great interest, "This is the tacit understanding between me and Imogen. He knows what I want to do, and he is also using me to complete his transformation. For this, he will temporarily endure until he obtains enough power to face me directly with my help." The act of slaying the gods must be carried out. I was truly tired of the foolish gods in this world. They were all so cowardly and secretive, constantly retracting their heads into their shells like frightened turtles. It was time for them to contribute their power to the world. Let those with more potential and vigor take the lead. I have combined the power of the Apollo scepter and the spear of judgment, giving this weapon the power to slay gods. When Imodin gets his hands on it, this divine weapon used by the god of death to test his warriors will pierce through his own heart. On the Nile River, the passenger ship carrying O'Connor and Evelyn slowly left the port. Chen Ong also ordered, "Let's go. It's time to wake up those sleeping imperialists. I want to see if the whetstone I prepared for Imodin can sharpen a god's power. I hope the empire of the unsetting sun will not let me down." On the side of the Great Pyramid of Giza that was facing away from the Nile River, a huge airbag slowly rose. The airship was pure white, equipped with all kinds of heavy weapons and a huge hangar. When the streamlined body of the airship rose from the back of the Great Pyramid of Giza, its magnificent body cast a shadow on both sides of the Nile River. On the opposite side of the river, many Egyptians knelt on the ground. Evelyn stared at the huge airship above her head, dumbfounded. This time, she did not feel the familiar gaze. O'Connell watched as the airship slowly turned around and headed downstream. The passenger and cargo ship that they were on followed behind. They could only watch as the shadow of the airship slowly lengthened on the ground, faintly disappearing into the distance. On the airship, Chen Ong put away the spear of judgment. Li Mingyi and Zhao Yingqi followed behind him to deal with the document. There were also hundreds of black-clothed Blood Clan providing protection on the airship. A low buzzing sound came from afar. Dozens of modified Camel fighter jets took off from Cairo airport. With the airship as the core formation, the huge aviation battle group flew towards the estuary of the Mediterranean Sea. On the ground, the fleet of the Eye of Horus stretched for several kilometers. A huge army was on an expedition. In the faraway Suez Canal Company, the British army that had been relieved of their garrison duty finally officially entered the barracks today and handed over the garrison duty. After more than a month of investigation, the members of the Suez Canal Company who had accompanied them also officially began the handover and management work. They began to take over the control of the armory, the checkpoints, and the accounting document. Chapter 671. When the airship appeared on the horizon of Port Said, it was already close to midnight. Chen Ong looked at the blurry port on the horizon and signaled for the airship to stop. Port Said was currently the second largest port in Egypt. It was located at the northern end of the Suez Canal on the Mediterranean Sea. It was originally a small village and was built with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1859. Just like most cities, this place had a large area of urban slums. Only the port close to the northern exit of the Suez Canal was still brightly lit at midnight. Sailors from various countries who came from the Suez Canal, British soldiers stationed here, as well as white merchants from England, France, and Belgium, as well as sailors and adventurers, were all living a drunken life in this port, joking and laughing. When Chen Eng's airship appeared on the horizon, because Chen Ong ordered the lights on the airship to be switched off, no one noticed the strange white dot on the horizon. In fact, the camel planes that lowered the frequency of their engines were even more hidden. Other than a little humming sound, they were like little shadows in the night sky. Chen Ong stood next to the porthole of the airship with a dozen vampires in black beside him. The camel planes were already silently flying towards Port Said. In the sky above the port, dozens of black figures suddenly descended from the plane. They pounced down from the back seat and glided towards various important locations in Port Said. In the shadows of the city below, there were also many men in black with the symbol of the Horus's eye to receive them. Chen Ong greeted Li Mingyi and the others and had them take over the intelligence and command of Port Said from the airship. Then, with a push of his toes, he pounced out from the airship that was hundreds of meters above the ground. The vampires behind him hurriedly followed. Chen-Ong controlled his mana to bind the air around him, forming a flat aerodynamic shape. Using this, he flew swiftly towards Port Said. The vampires following behind all had large bat wings protruding from their backs. The blood-red bat wings provided them with the tension to glide. Relying on their innate bloodline, they nimbly followed Chen-Ong as they traversed the sky above Port Said. Their speed was exceedingly fast. Occasionally, some of them would raise their heads to look at the sky, but they could only see a few shadows flitting past. Most of them would only think that their eyes were playing tricks on them. A British Marine stared dumbfoundedly at a few gigantic shadows flitting past his head with a whistling sound. Half drunk and half sober, he opened his mouth wide in astonishment and asked his companions behind him, "Did you guys see that?" Unfortunately, the moment his voice left his mouth, it was completely absorbed by a wide palm. He could only hear a soft hush by his ear, and a pair of iron pincer-like arms tightly bound him. The Marine was still struggling, but he felt an ice-cold blade piercing into his heart through the gap between his ribs. Large amounts of blood flowed out from his body. Before he died, the Marine could feel the dagger in his body devouring his blood hungrily. Soon, he lost consciousness. Chen-Eng's speed was raised to an extreme level. He had also lowered his height to around 20 meters. For the last distance, he glided through the winding alleys of Port Said, shuttling through the crisscrossing alleys as fast as lightning. His target was the most conspicuous building in Port Said, which was also the official residence of the British High Commissioner in Egypt. The British soldier who was on sentry duty at the entrance of the official residence was knocked to the ground by a dark shadow descending from the sky. His blood-curdling scream startled the nearby patrolling squads of British soldiers. When they were attracted by the commotion at the entrance, they did not notice the dark shadow above them. A black-clothed vampire charged into their midst, using the momentum to knock down a group of British soldiers. The scimitar in his hand swiftly slashed across their chins, rising and falling like an elegant dance. In a few breaths, he had slaughtered the 9-man patrol squad. Fresh blood nourished his dried-up wellspring, causing the bloody glow on his bat wings to thicken. The unique thermal vision of the vampires allowed them to easily detect the heat waves of humans. Furthermore, these vampires were known as blood sniffers, allowing them to figure out the number of people and defensive arrangements in the building from hundreds of meters away. Dozens of dark shadows swiftly took their positions according to their mission, killing everyone who stood in their way. When one of Chen-Eng's feet stepped onto the marble floor of the official residence, he was like a nimble eagle. With a small turn, he dispelled the enormous kinetic energy and stood firmly on the ground. 2 vampire guards opened the door for him. They first went forward to clear the way, while Chen-Ong followed behind them slowly. The 2 vampire guards rushed forward like phantoms and killed the 2 guards who came to investigate after hearing the commotion outside. From the windows and windowsills, more vampires entered the luxurious official residence in an orderly manner. The British High Commissioner in Egypt was like the Emperor of the whole of Egypt. This commissioner was sent here by the British after Commissioner Wingate in Cairo was transformed into a vampire by the Eye of Horus. He temporarily lived in the property of the Suez Canal Company. The vampires surrounded the official residence, blocked the exit, and quickly took over the luxurious official residence. At this time, Chen-Ong led a group of vampire guards through the white walnut door. He stepped on the high-quality cashmere carpet produced in Egypt and walked toward the master's reception room. The official residence was generally European in style, but with a strong Egyptian flavor. The reception room was also arranged according to the British tradition. Outside the reception room, the attendants of the British High Commissioner were still fiercely resisting. The 2 Indian servants who were proficient in yoga were extremely difficult to deal with. They had strong spirits and tough bodies. Because they were proficient in yoga and ancient Indian martial arts, their bodies could be bent into all kinds of incredible shapes at any time to use all kinds of strange moves. One of the vampire guards beside Chen Ong leaped onto the ceiling with a slight push from the wall beside him. Like a giant bat, he twisted the scimitar in his hand and twisted the hilt upside down, wrapping around the throat of a Sikh servant like a viper. Then, he twisted the scimitar with both hands, and a head flew into the air. Without the slightest hesitation, he lifted his leg and kicked the corpse away. At the same time, the scimitar in his hand cut through the air, drawing a strange curve in the air, and cutting the throat of the second person. The angry roar of the British High Commissioner came from the reception room. "Who are you?" Several guards were blocking the entrance of the guest room. They had already repelled 2 waves of attacks from the blood breeds, and they had paid a terrible price for it. There were several corpses on the ground, and the injured blood breeds had already recovered with the blood of the other guards in the official residence. Chen Ong stepped on the Indian's corpse and slowly walked toward the reception room. He said in a deep voice, "You should know us, High Commissioner. Aren't you looking for us? Now we are here." Chapter 672. The Commissioner and the important members of the Suez Canal Company, who were trapped in the reception room, looked at each other. The guards protecting them suddenly became violent. The most frightening thing was the 2 arrows that were shot from tricky angles. The speed and sharpness of the arrows made Chen Ong suddenly feel a sense of vigilance. He pressed his right hand on his waist, and a translucent silver fan with a radius as long as a sword flashed by. The 2 arrows were split in half from the middle, and they fell to the ground. At this time, the silver sword light in the air dissipated, and the British finally saw the weapon in Chen Ang's right hand. It was a flexible sword that could even be wrapped around the waist. The sword light was as clear as water, and the sword body was tough. It was straight and shiny in Chen Ang's hand. No one could imagine that this sword was just wrapped around Chen Ang's waist with a relatively large curve. English longbowmen. Chen Ong looked at the 2 British soldiers behind the Commissioner. The purple wood longbows in their hands revealed their identity. This kind of strange body with an extremely strong upper body and deformed chest and back bones reminded people of the English longbowmen before the British Industrial Revolution. They fought against the invasion and made the invaders of the European continent tremble with fear. But Chen Ong did not expect that this kind of ancient soldier was still preserved by the British in today's era of hot and cold weapons. At this time, the 2 British soldiers who rushed out of the reception room had already arrived in front of Chen Ong. Although they were wearing the British military uniform, their yellow skin and the distinctive characteristics of the Highlanders all showed that these soldiers were not British. In their hands, the strange weapons that looked like dog legs showed their identity. These people holding Nepalese scimitars were the Gurkha warriors who had once dealt a huge blow to the British army. After the British conquered the Gurkhas, they hired a large number of these Gurkha warriors who were good at fighting to participate in suppressing the uprising against colonial rule in India. The Gurkha warriors were disciplined, brave, and good at fighting. The physique of the Highlanders made them tough. They believed in Hinduism and advocated ascetic rituals, which gave them a strong will to endure pain. The 2 scimitars mercilessly slashed at Chen Ang's vital point. These Gurkha warriors had extremely high pain tolerance, and their reaction to pain was almost slow. They were skilled in martial arts, and most importantly, they were not afraid of death. They were often willing to die together with the enemy. These 2 Gurkha warriors were the best of the best. After some mysterious Hindu rituals, they were proficient in yoga, and their bodies were abnormally agile. They also had extraordinary strength. Their strength was no less than that of the vampires. Of course, if the 2 sides fought head-on, the final victory would be the vampires because the vampires had an almost immortal recovery ability. And the Gurkha warriors were still human. The long sword in Chen Ang's hand bent slightly under his control. The blade drew a curve, accumulating elastic kinetic energy. The tip of the sword swayed with the curve of the blade. In Chen Ang's hand, this extremely difficult-to-use weapon was as flexible as a vicious poisonous snake. In the time that Chen Ong took a step forward, He had cut a deep wound on the wrists of the 2 Gurkha warriors. The wound was so deep that the bone could be seen. The scimitars could no longer control their momentum and flew out of the hands of the Gurkha warriors. The sword flashed again, and the 2 men's faces were cut by the tip of the sword. The wound swept past their eyes and cut the eyeballs under the eyelids in half. Ah! The Gurkha warriors clenched their teeth and endured the sharp pain in their eyes. They still wanted to fight, but Chen Ong had already passed them. The vampires behind him quickly dragged the 2 who had lost their sight away. At this time, Chen Ong was only 5 steps away from the British commissioner. He stepped forward with his sword in hand, and the long sword in his hand was pulled out like a dragon from his sleeve. He casually stabbed a British soldier who came to stop him. A black-robed clergyman next to the British commissioner pressed one hand on the Bible and hurriedly chanted Latin scriptures. He turned the front of the cross to Chen Ong. The cross was made of gold and inlaid with gems. It emitted a bright holy light. The vampire behind Chen Ong let out a muffled groan. His skin that was exposed to the holy light seemed to be burned. Large pieces of skin fell off and were charred. The other 3 barefoot black soldiers quickly rushed forward. These Maasai warriors were hired by the British from the most warlike tribe in Africa. They were tall and unusually strong, and the spears in their hands were unusually flexible. The 3 of them cooperated seamlessly, sometimes attacking separately, sometimes attacking together, some luring the enemy, and some fighting back. The 3 of them seemed to have merged into one, and it was difficult to defend against them. If it was a vampire standing here, when they were suddenly attacked by the holy light, even if it was Hong Fan, he would be at a great disadvantage. Unfortunately, it was not Hong Fan standing here. Chen Ong reached down with his left hand, and a silver P229 fell into his palm. The long sword in his right hand moved along with his wrist, and the edge of the blade trembled like a flower, but there was a hidden sharpness hidden in it. He could always stab the enemy's vital parts in an unhurried manner. At the same time, his left hand fired continuously, calmly killing the 2 longbowmen who posed a threat behind him. He did not stop walking, killing everything in his way, leaving a ground full of corpses, until he arrived in front of the British commissioner. At this time, the vampires at the back who were blinded by the holy light had also recovered. They absorbed the blood of the people around them and quickly recovered. Several people had already followed Chen Ong in. The clergyman in black wanted to resist, and the cross in his hand was preparing a fierce counterattack, but his neck was slit by Chen Ong. The blood from his neck touched the body of a black-clothed vampire behind Chen Ong, causing him to go berserk. He roared and pounced into the center of the reception room. The expression of the important personnel of Suez in the middle changed drastically, and they tried to stop him with a series of shots, but he was as fast as the wind. In the blink of an eye, he appeared next to them and grabbed the necks of 2 of them. His fingernails that carried blood energy had already pierced into their arteries. Seeing that Chen Ong was already standing in front of him, the British commissioner hurriedly shouted, "You can't kill me! I'm a hereditary baron of Great Britain. If you kill me, you'll be in big trouble even if you're a vampire. As long as you let me go, I'll tell you everything about the empire." Chen Eng's expression was indifferent. "No need, we'll get it ourselves." He stepped aside, and the vampire baron behind him suddenly looked up from his hood. His pale face gave him a unique evil aura, but the British commissioner obviously recognized him. He screamed in horror like a little girl, "Wingate! The former commissioner of Egypt, Wingate!" His voice was filled with fear and a hint of surprise. Since Wingate had been transformed into a member of the Blood Clan, it proved that his fate was probably the same. Although he would lose a lot of power and benefits after being transformed into a member of the Blood Clan, at least he would be able to live and enjoy eternal life. Therefore, when Wingate bit his throat, he did not have the slightest intention of resisting. Very soon, the commissioner turned into a dry corpse and was thrown to the ground by Wingate like garbage. Wingate knelt on the ground and reported, Master, I've read his memory and know the British plan.